Imagine you're holding both of their hands, one child on each side. They're looking up at you, not crying, not afraid, just waiting. They trust you. They don't know what's coming. But you do. There's been an accident, some rare, irreversible condition. You've been given a choice, not to save a life, not to end one, but to erase something, a memory. One child will forget you completely. Every moment, every word, every comfort, gone, like you were never there. The other child will remember everything. You'll still be their parent. Their memories will stay intact. They'll carry your love and your loss. You don't get to explain. You don't get to say goodbye. You just choose, and the process begins. Your mind resists. It looks for loopholes, some way out, some compromise. But there is none. One of them will lose you entirely, not to death, not to distance, but to silence, to absence. You'll vanish from their mind like a dream they can't quite recall. And so you start weighing things you never thought you would. Which child is stronger? Which one needs you more? Which one could survive this better? Or worse, who would suffer more by remembering? You think about their personalities. One is quieter, more inward. The other, more expressive, always asking questions. You imagine the quiet one forgetting you, growing up with a strange emptiness they can't explain. You imagine the talkative one, remembering every detail and carrying that weight into adulthood, wondering what they did wrong. Neither choice feels right. So you try to reason through it logically. Maybe the one who's younger should forget. Maybe it would be less painful if they never had the memories in the first place. But then you remember their voice calling you mama or dad. You remember holding them at night. You remember their laughter when they were too young to speak. Would you really let that vanish? So you shift your focus. You tell yourself it's about preservation, keeping the relationship alive in at least one mind, letting your love continue, even if only one child carries it forward. But that doesn't ease the guilt, it deepens it. Because now you're deciding who gets to keep love and who has it taken away. You imagine years passing. You imagine the child who remembers you, sitting quietly with an old photo, telling stories to their sibling, who listens without recognition. No flicker of memory, no echo of feeling, just polite curiosity, as if hearing about a stranger, and you wonder, would that child feel the loss subconsciously? Would they sense a hole where something once was? Would they question why they don't feel anything? Would they think something's wrong with them? Now the question shifts. It's no longer about who forgets. It's about who lives with the consequences. The one who remembers will grieve, but they'll understand. The one who forgets won't grieve, but they might always feel something missing. You start thinking about fairness, about justice. Should you flip a coin? Let chance decide. Would that make it more bearable or more cruel? But deep down, you know randomness would be a lie, a way to avoid responsibility. You're the parent. The choice must be yours. And that's the most unbearable part. Because it's not about what's right. There is no right. It's about who you're willing to lose and how. And then you start questioning your own motives. Are you choosing the one you love more or the one you can live without? Are you trying to spare the child or yourself? And now the idea of love starts to feel poisoned, because love shouldn't have to choose. But here you are. You close your eyes and picture their faces. You try to imagine one forgetting you, but your mind refuses. It won't let go. And still, the clock is ticking. You remember something small. One of them fell once, scraped their knee. You picked them up. They buried their face in your chest and sobbed until they fell asleep. That moment flashes through you like lightning. And now you wonder if that memory is enough to save them, or if it only makes the decision harder. You've always believed you'd do anything for your children. anything to protect them. But this isn't about protection, it's about subtraction, choosing which child loses part of themselves by losing you. And suddenly, the real horror comes. Not the choice, but the knowledge that after it's done, only one child will look at you with recognition. The other will pass you in the street without a second glance, and worse, maybe you'll start to forget them too. Not their name, not their face, but the feeling, the connection, the rhythm of their voice when they called you. And now you understand, this isn't about memory, it's about erasure. One of you will be gone from the other, not dead, just erased. And you realize there's no version of this where you stay whole. You will lose something either way, and the part of you that makes the decision will never be the same again. Imagine your bank account grows each time a stranger dies. No one you know, no one you see, no blood, no sirens, no trace, just a quiet notification, a subtle digital hum, your balance increasing by an amount large enough to matter, small enough to ignore. At first, it shocks you, then it intrigues you, and eventually it just becomes routine. You tell yourself it's not your doing. You didn't cause their deaths, you're just the recipient. But this is passive beneficiary. You were chosen, somehow. It doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter why. You weren't asked, and you're not obligated to stop it. But still, you notice the correlation. Every deposit has a cost, and that cost is measured in human life. You don't know who they are, you never will. A pedestrian in another country, an elderly man asleep in a hospital bed, a young woman alone on a highway at night. Each time they disappear, you gain. You don't see it, but you feel it. Quietly, under the surface, the equation becomes part of your thinking. Death equals reward. Loss equals gain. At first, it haunts you. Every payment brings guilt. You wonder about the people behind the numbers, what they left behind, who cried when they were gone. But the guilt fades faster than you expect. Because the money helps, it really helps. Rent becomes easier, food becomes better, comfort, once rare, becomes constant. And with each new death, your resistance softens. Eventually, you start to wish for the next deposit. You don't say it out loud, you don't admit it. But in the back of your mind, you begin to anticipate the next surge. Not hoping for death exactly, but no longer dreading it either. You start to calculate how many it would take to pay off your debts, how many to buy a house, how many to never work again. You don't cause their deaths, you never touch a thing, but you start to notice how the deaths seem to match your needs. Right when money is tight, it arrives. When a bill is overdue, another deposit. You don't say anything, but you feel the shape of the pattern. And that pattern starts to shape you. You don't celebrate the deaths, but you stop mourning them. You stop asking questions. You stop wondering who they were. You stop pretending to care. And eventually, the line fades completely. There is no moral tension anymore. Just balance sheets. Just the numbers, until the moment comes when the money doesn't arrive fast enough. When a loved one is in danger. When an emergency bleeds your savings dry, and you whisper the unthinkable, just one more death, just one. You don't know who, you don't need to know, you don't even need to say it out loud, you just wish for it, and it comes. And now something inside you breaks, because you realize you've crossed a line without ever lifting a finger. You didn't kill anyone, but you wanted someone to die. You were paid for a death, and you hoped for it. The distance is gone now. The fantasy that you were passive, that you were innocent, it collapses. You begin to wonder if this was always a test, a way to see how long you could last before making the shift from tolerance to desire, before the horror of death became just another form of income. And now, even when you want to stop, you can't. Because each time you spend the money, you participate. Each item you buy, each luxury you enjoy, carries the weight of someone else's absence, their silence, their final moment, traded for your convenience. You didn't kill them, you just made it worth it. And slowly you begin to fear the most disturbing truth of all, not that you're part of something evil, not that you've grown numb to it, but that you've started to believe it's fair, that your comfort matters more than their existence, that maybe deep down you've always thought that. He spends his life helping people, not out of obligation, not for recognition, but because he wants to. Every gesture is careful. Every word is warm. He listens, remembers, shows up. If there were ever a person you'd call good, it would be him. So how does he become a torturer? It doesn't happen all at once. That's important. There's no moment when he snaps or changes or chooses something dark. It begins with something small, a request, a routine procedure, a role he was asked to play. He doesn't ask questions because there's no reason to. He trusts the people around him. He trusts the system. He trusts that what he's doing is necessary. And at first it is. Or at least it seems to be. A man is brought to him, restrained. There's a file, a list of reasons, a case made. The man is dangerous, they say. He has information that could prevent suffering, save lives. But he isn't talking. They just need someone skilled, someone who can encourage cooperation. And the kind man, he agrees. He thinks he's just helping, doing what needs to be done. He doesn't use violence, not at first, just questions. Soft ones. Polite. He speaks gently, like he always does. But the man won't talk, so the requests shift. Small things. Discomfort. Sleep deprivation, stress positions, nothing dramatic, nothing brutal, techniques that have been approved, tested, rationalized, and the kind man administers them, calmly, carefully, because they told him it would help, because they said it wasn't torture. The man in the chair begins to suffer, slowly, quietly, not in the way you'd expect, no screaming, no chaos, just a gradual breaking. Skin growing pale, eyes losing focus, words turning to silence, and the kind man sees it, but he keeps going, not because he enjoys it, not because he wants to hurt anyone, but because he believes it's for a greater good. Because every time he hesitates, someone reminds him of what's at stake, and he listens. Because he's good, because he wants to help. But something begins to change inside him. A flicker of doubt, too faint to name. He tells himself the same words over and over. This is helping. This is necessary. But the man's suffering lingers in his thoughts, in quiet moments, in dreams. It doesn't go away. It sits there, like a bruise he can't stop touching. Eventually, someone new is brought in. Another case, another file, and it happens again. Slightly faster this time, slightly rougher. There's no time to waste, they say. The situation is urgent, and the kind man adjusts. Not out of cruelty, not out of indifference, but out of trust. He begins to learn how to cause pain more efficiently, where to press, what to say, how to control the environment. He becomes useful, respected, effective. People come to him with praise now. They tell him he's saving lives, and he believes them. He has to. Because if he doesn't, he has to ask what he's really doing. What's disturbing isn't that he becomes cruel. He never does. He's still soft-spoken, still patient, still kind. That's what makes it so hard to see. There's no monstrous transformation, no descent into sadism, just a slow, careful slide into something he never thought possible. He still believes he's helping, even when the methods become harsher, even when the man in the chair starts to scream. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. That someone good, someone gentle, can become an instrument of suffering without ever intending to. That kindness, when paired with obedience, becomes a weapon. That trust, when placed in the wrong hands, can make good people do unspeakable things. He never questions whether the people he's hurting are guilty. He doesn't ask for proof. That's not his job, they say, and he agrees. Because doubt would mean stopping, and stopping would mean admitting what he's done. But the thought lingers, always, quiet, persistent, unwelcome. What if one of them was innocent? Not all of them, not even most, just one person, in all these years, who didn't deserve it. One person he hurt, one person he broke, one person whose suffering he created, preserved and ignored. What does that make him? He tells himself it's impossible to know. That second guessing helps no one. But late at night, when there's no one to reassure him, the question won't leave. It curls up beside him in the dark, not because he enjoys the pain he caused, but because he didn't notice when it stopped bothering him. And that's when he knows. Not through guilt, not through horror, but through silence. That he became a torturer, not by choice, but by kindness. You wake up, and something feels wrong. Not strange, not terrifying, just off. Like the rhythm of the day is slightly too familiar. The light falls the same way. The sounds hit in the same sequence. The way someone says your name. It's not déjà vu. It's deeper, heavier. A sense, not a memory, that you've already done this. That you've lived this day before. But if that's true, then the next thought comes uninvited. You must have chosen wrong. Otherwise, why are you here again? There's no voice confirming this. No message from beyond. Just a quiet, persistent intuition. You've lived this exact day before. And the decisions you made last time were worse than they should have been. That's why you're repeating it now. Not to get it right, exactly. Just to do less harm. But you don't remember what you did. You don't remember who you hurt. Only the weight, the friction in your chest. As if the day itself is resisting you. Every interaction feels slightly loaded. Every word you speak feels like something you've regretted before. You can't prove it, of course. You can't say, I've already lived this. That would sound like madness. But that doesn't stop the certainty from growing. You try to make better choices. You hold your tongue when you want to criticize. You help someone you might otherwise ignore. You choose patience instead of anger. And still, something doesn't change. Still, the air feels heavy with repetition. And now you wonder, what if the problem wasn't the obvious decisions? What if it was something smaller? A moment of dishonesty, a selfish thought, a look you gave someone when you thought they weren't watching. Maybe last time you smiled at someone and it ruined their day. Maybe you hesitated when someone needed you and they never asked again. Maybe you looked away when something inside you knew you were supposed to act. You don't remember, but your body does. The way you move through the world is slower now, more cautious, as if you're surrounded by invisible consequences. You begin to suspect that the version of you who lived this day before wasn't evil, just careless, just tired, just busy. And maybe that's the worst part. Maybe you're not repeating this day because of one terrible mistake, but because of dozens of small avoidable ones. It's not that you killed someone, it's that you let someone drift away. It's not that you lied, it's that you told the truth in a way that made it hurt more. You weren't cruel, you were lazy with your kindness. You rationed your attention, you gave less than you could have. And now, here you are again, given the same hours, the same faces, the same chances, and the quiet, terrifying pressure of trying not to repeat yourself. But this brings a darker thought. If you've lived this day before and still made mistakes, then what happens when you fail again? How many times have you already failed? How many times have you been here? What if this isn't the second time you've lived today? What if it's the 100th? What if you've already tried being kind and cruel and indifferent? What if you've lived this day so many times that you've run out of ways to be better? Maybe you've already saved the person who's going to die. Maybe you've already broken up with someone gently. Maybe you've already said all the right words, and it still wasn't enough. So now you don't know if your choices matter. You don't know if this is a test you can pass, or if it's just punishment. Repetition, not as a second chance, but as a sentence. Not to teach you something, but to remind you of everything you can't undo. And that's when it hits you. If you really have lived this day before, and you really did choose worse, then somewhere buried inside you is the memory of what you did. Not a mental image, not a flashback, just the feeling that you're the person who let it happen. That guilt isn't coming from outside, it's coming from within. You aren't being haunted by the day, you're being haunted by yourself. And the scariest part isn't that you've already lived this day, it's the growing suspicion that you'll live it again tomorrow. Would you save a killer baby if it smiled at you? Not a metaphor, not a hypothetical, just a baby, small, quiet, eyes still unfocused. A faint smile beginning to form, not because it recognizes you, but because that's what babies do sometimes. It reaches for you, clumsy, soft, harmless. You know what it will become, not might, not could, will. It will grow up and kill people, not out of confusion or desperation, but out of intent, real harm, premeditated cruelty, victims you can already picture, pain you haven't yet felt, but somehow already believe in. And yet, here it is, smiling, innocent now, undeniably so. No thoughts, no memories, no guilt. It isn't faking it. It doesn't know how. This isn't manipulation. There's nothing to manipulate. It doesn't even know what you are. You hesitate, but not because you don't understand the stakes. You hesitate because your instincts can't match the facts. You want to protect it. You don't know why. Maybe it's the warmth of its skin, or the way its chest rises and falls so gently. Maybe it's the weight of it in your arms, or the way its fingers curl instinctively around one of yours. This isn't abstract. This is real, physical, immediate. And that smile, it doesn't mean anything. You know that. It isn't a promise of goodness or a sign of hidden purity. But it feels like something. It feels like hope. You imagine someone coming to take it away, not to hurt it yet, just to prepare. And the baby doesn't know. It won't cry, not yet. But you imagine that it might. You imagine it crying when it's gone, afraid and alone. You imagine its last moments. You imagine who you would have to become to let that happen. And suddenly, the certainty you had before about who it will become, what it will do, it starts to blur. Not because it's less true, but because your body won't let you live inside that truth and act against what's in front of you. It's not confusion, it's contradiction. You want both things to be true, that you are a good person, and that you are not the kind of person who would let a child die, even this child, even knowing what it will do. And so, your thoughts stretch for a middle ground that doesn't exist. Could someone else stop it later? Could something change? Could love rewire what's broken before it starts breaking others? But you know better. You've seen what it becomes. You've seen the aftermath. You know the names of its victims, their families. You've seen the footage. You've read the reports. And still, it smiles. You begin to realize that morality doesn't help here. There's no principle that fits. There's no framework that makes this choice clean. It's not about justice or consequence. It's about you, your threshold, your tolerance, your breaking point. You could walk away, let someone else decide. Convince yourself that passivity is not complicity, that you aren't choosing to save it, you're just not the one to condemn it. But you would know, every day after, every life it ends, every moment of suffering that follows, you would know your hands were not clean, just empty. Or you could act. You could stop what's coming. You could intervene while it's still possible, while the blood hasn't yet been spilled. You could be the reason none of it happens, but then you'd be the one who harmed a baby. A real one, not imagined, not metaphorical, just a baby, smiling, and you'd never forget that either. You start to understand that this isn't a question about the baby at all. It's a question about how far your empathy can stretch before it breaks, about what part of you must be severed to make the right choice, or the necessary one. And the worst part isn't that there's no right answer. The worst part is that either way, something in you dies. Either way, you lose something you won't get back. And maybe the most disturbing truth is this: if the baby hadn't smiled, the choice would have been easier. If it had cried, if it had looked away, if it had just stayed still and silent, but it smiled. And now you have to live with the fact that something so small, so meaningless, could change everything. That one unknowing smile could be the reason the future goes unchanged. That a moment of innocent warmth might be the thing that allows future cruelty to flourish. And you'll never be able to say why you let it live, only that it smiled, and you couldn't look away. What if the only way to survive is to destroy the part of yourself that refuses? Not metaphorically, not emotionally, but directly, irreversibly. You're trapped, cornered by something that won't let you leave unless you give up the one thing you swore you never would. Your values, your identity, the core belief that separates you from everything you've always despised. That one rule you thought you'd never break. And now the exit is right there in front of you. But the price is simple. You have to become what you hate. Not just imitate it. Not use its methods temporarily. You have to become it. Think like it. Act like it. Let its logic replace your own. Let its violence run through your hands. Let its justification echo in your mind until it doesn't sound like justification anymore, just truth. And so you stand there, frozen. You still believe in who you are. You still think it matters. But the situation doesn't care. The people who hurt you, betrayed you, cornered you, they aren't playing by your rules. And suddenly you start to wonder, what if the rules themselves are the trap? What if the line you've drawn between yourself and them was never real? What if the reason they always win is because they were willing to cross it first? You tell yourself you'd rather die than become like them. But now, death isn't a concept. It's coming, it's real, and it's here because you refuse to adapt, because you clung to who you thought you were, even when it stopped working, even when it got you hurt, got others hurt, again and again. So you face the decision, let everything collapse or become what you despise and survive. And once the idea enters your mind, it doesn't leave. It spreads. What if survival is its own form of morality? What if the good you were trying to protect doesn't matter if you're gone? What if the only reason you ever hated them was because you weren't desperate enough to understand them? Now you're not judging them. You're studying them, learning from them, taking notes. The disgust is still there, but it's quieter now, pushed aside by something colder, something simpler. because you've tried everything else. You reasoned, appealed, waited, hoped, and every time you were punished for it. Every time they used your decency against you. Every time your refusal to become like them made you weak, predictable, easy to hurt. And you start to wonder if decency is just another form of ego. If you're not trying to be good, you're just trying to feel good about yourself, to believe you're different, better. But in the end, it didn't save anyone. So maybe you stop asking whether it's right. Maybe you start asking whether it works. And once that shift happens, once you let utility replace morality, everything else follows. You think about all the things you could have done sooner, all the damage you could have prevented if you'd acted without hesitation, without shame, without mercy. Now you're making plans. You're not trying to avoid becoming them anymore. You're trying to do it better, cleaner, smarter, more precise. You convince yourself that the difference is control, that you'll only go as far as necessary, that you'll come back. But you know better. There is no coming back. There's only the crossing. And once you've done what you swore you never would, the part of you that hated them, really hated them, can't exist anymore. You've proven that under pressure, you are them. And everything you thought made you different was just circumstance. Maybe that's the final twist. The thing you hate most about them was never their cruelty or their lies. It was the freedom, the power, the refusal to feel guilt. And now you feel it too. And it's terrifying how good it feels. Because the only thing worse than becoming what you hate is realizing you were never that different to begin with. What if you felt the pain of losing someone you never had? You remember their voice, the way they laughed, the way they looked at you when they were proud or tired or scared. You remember arguments, long walks, quiet mornings. You remember them dying. You remember the weight of it, the numbness, the confusion, and it hurts. It truly hurts, but none of it happened. Not in this life, not in any life that can be verified, measured, or proven. The pain is real, but the story behind it isn't. So, where does that leave you? It starts subtly. A dream you wake up from too slowly. A memory that arrives with the sharpness of fact, but no context. You assume it's imagination, a trick of the mind. You tell yourself it's nothing, but it doesn't go away. It builds, becomes clearer, more detailed. You can almost map out entire moments with them, moments you've never lived. Eventually, the grief feels indistinguishable from reality. The longing, the ache, the hole left behind, it's all there. You feel like you're mourning someone who was part of you. But when you reach for them, there's nothing. No photos, no history, no name. Just the shape of an absence you can't explain. People will tell you it's psychological. Maybe it is. That doesn't make it any less real, because pain doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't wait for permission. It just exists, and it shapes you. But the discomfort grows when you try to understand it. You begin to wonder, what exactly do you remember? Are these remnants of something real? Or is your mind fabricating meaning out of nothing? And if it is fabrication, why is it so consistent? Why does it feel so intentional? Some scientists suggest these are false memories, misfires of the brain, a result of stress, trauma, or the mind's attempt to make sense of emotional chaos. But that explanation brings no relief. If anything, it makes it worse. Because if your mind can invent pain with this much clarity, what else has it invented? What else do you believe happened that never did? You start questioning more than just this phantom grief. You begin questioning all memory, all identity. If you can feel love for someone who doesn't exist, then how do you trust any feeling you've ever had? If a life can feel lived in your head alone, then what separates it from reality? People talk about delusions, hallucinations, dreams. But what if those aren't failures of the mind? What if they're just alternate narratives? Your consciousness happened to pick up. Your body lives one life, but your awareness echoes many. Maybe, in some version of existence, this person was real. Maybe you lived that life. And then somehow that thread got severed. You landed here, in this version, alone, remembering what never happened. You start to see the cracks in the world more clearly. Things that shouldn't be familiar, but are. Tones you've never heard that feel nostalgic. Faces of strangers that stir emotion. Pain that doesn't fit your story. Grief without a grave. The people around you don't understand. How could they? You can't prove what you feel. And so you're left with a unique kind of loneliness. Not just being alone, but being alone in your reality. No one else remembers what you do. No one else aches for the same ghost. And then comes the final unsettling question. If you can remember pain that never happened, can you also forget pain that did? What if your mind is hiding things from you, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation? What if some traumas were so deep, so destabilizing, that your brain replaced them with easier fictions, grief with no cause, pain with no origin? Now the boundaries between false memory and suppressed truth begin to blur. Maybe you didn't invent a person. Maybe you erased them. Maybe they were real, but your mind buried them somewhere. It thought you wouldn't find, but you did. And now you're remembering just enough to hurt, but not enough to heal. So which is worse, imagining pain that never existed, or forgetting pain that did? Because either way, you're left with the same wound, the same emptiness, the same questions that never quite resolve. And you begin to understand something quietly terrifying. It doesn't matter whether the pain is true or false, because your body believes it, and it will never let you forget. Who are you without the people you love? You might think that love is the one place you are most honest, that it's the opposite of control, the opposite of selfishness. But look more closely, and the boundary between love and manipulation begins to blur. Every act of kindness you give, every word of reassurance, every gesture of care, none of it happens in a vacuum. You know how it will be received. You know what they want to hear, what they need to feel safe, to stay close, to keep loving you. You don't just give love freely. You shape it, tailor it, adjust its intensity and direction based on the response you get back. You comfort someone because it calms their pain, but also because it makes them trust you more. You apologize because it's the right thing to do, but also because it restores balance, avoids conflict, keeps the relationship intact. You're not just expressing yourself, you're managing outcomes. Even when you say you love someone unconditionally, there's a quiet expectation embedded in it, a hope that they'll love you back, a desire that they'll stay, that they'll forgive, that they'll see you the way you want to be seen. If they don't, that love begins to change. It becomes strained, withholds warmth, waits for correction. At some point, love becomes a performance, a subtle one, unconscious even, but still a performance. You smile a little more when they're looking. You choose your words more carefully. You curate parts of yourself. You hide the thoughts you fear would make them leave. You show what makes you lovable and bury what makes you uncertain. Not to deceive, but to preserve. You start to realize that love isn't the absence of manipulation. It's often where it hides most convincingly. And then the disturbing thought arrives. Maybe every person you love is someone you're managing. Not maliciously, not consciously, but managing all the same. Calibrating your actions to maintain their affection. Avoid rejection. Reduce volatility. Maybe you're not just being with them. Maybe you're quietly shaping them and yourself to keep the relationship intact. You begin to wonder how many of your most generous moments were, in part, strategic. Not coldly, but naturally, as a way to survive emotionally, to keep stability, to feel secure. And if that's true, then what does it mean to say you love someone for who they are, when you're constantly adjusting who you are to fit what they need? It doesn't mean your love is fake. It means it's fragile, interwoven with fear, with memory, with need. You love, but you also rely. You love, but you also fear abandonment. You love, but you also shape that love to keep yourself safe. And then you ask yourself, if you stopped doing all of that, what would be left? If you stopped editing, performing, predicting, if you were just fully yourself, unfiltered, would they still love you, or would everything fall apart? What if the version of you that they love is a version you've carefully constructed, day after day? What if the person they think they know is the result of thousands of tiny choices you've made to be more likable, more acceptable, more easy to love? Now the ground feels less solid. You realize you're not sure where sincerity ends and self-preservation begins. You're not sure if the connection is real or just expertly maintained. You look at the people closest to you and wonder, do they love you, or do they love the way you make them feel? Do they love who you are, or who you are when you're trying not to lose them? And more unsettling still, do you love them for who they are, or for who they let you be? Do you love their presence, or the sense of safety they give you? Do you truly see them, or just the version of them that fits your life best? Because if love is the deepest connection we have, and even that is laced with unconscious manipulation, then where does that leave us? Maybe the most painful part isn't that your love is insincere. It isn't. You feel it deeply. But maybe it's never clean, never pure. Always touched by the quiet urge to keep things going, to avoid being alone, to manage the fragile ecosystem of connection. And maybe that's the real weight of this realization. Not that you're a liar or a fraud, but that you've never truly been able to separate love from control. That even your most intimate relationships are shaped, constantly, by invisible hands, yours and theirs, each molding, adjusting, hiding, protecting. And you start to see that the people you love most are also the ones you manipulate most. Not to harm them, but to keep them close. To keep them needing you. To keep them from seeing the full, unfiltered version of you and walking away. And suddenly, love feels different. Not less beautiful, but less certain, less pure. Because maybe you're not sure anymore whether anyone has ever really loved you, or if they've only loved the version of you that you've been carefully building piece by piece for as long as you can remember. What happens when the truth becomes a performance? At first, you tell yourself it's a good thing, that truth spreading is always positive, that awareness leads to progress. But then you notice something strange. The more people believe a truth, the less real it starts to feel. The more it's repeated, the more it begins to sound rehearsed. The more it's shared, the more it becomes a slogan, not a conviction. You see people saying it without thinking, repeating it to signal they're on the right side. And suddenly, the truth isn't a revelation anymore. It's a costume, a badge, a password to be accepted by others. What does a belief become when it's repeated too easily? When it no longer requires reflection or discomfort? You think of a hard truth you once struggled to accept. Something that changed the way you saw the world. It hurt. It challenged you. But over time you adapted to it. You internalized it. You made it part of yourself. Now you hear someone else say it. Confidently, proudly, without hesitation. And instead of feeling seen or understood, you feel detached. As if they're quoting something they've never truly questioned. As if the words carry none of the weight you once felt. It's not that they're wrong. It's that the truth no longer feels alive. You watch it spread further. People using it in conversations where it barely fits, citing it to shut others down, defending it without nuance. And each time it loses something. Each time it becomes a little more hollow, a little more dead. You wonder if the truth, like anything else, can be overexposed. If it can be weakened not by lies, but by too much agreement, too much certainty. Because certainty is comfortable. And truth, real truth, never is. Truth should sting a little. It should humble you. It should leave you uncertain, not affirmed, but when too many people claim to hold it, that edge is dulled. It becomes safe. And when it becomes safe, it becomes forgettable. Not just in others, but in yourself. Beliefs you once fought hard to understand now roll off your tongue easily. Beliefs that once felt risky now feel obvious. And the more obvious they feel, the less honest they seem. You're no longer sure if you believe them because they're true or because everyone around you does. You think about the truths no one wants to say, the ones that remain dangerous, uncomfortable, lonely, the ones that haven't yet been flattened by repetition. And you wonder, are those the only real truths left? Or is every truth doomed to decay the moment it's shared too widely? It's not just about honesty anymore. It's about performance, alignment, safety. And the moment truth becomes a way to signal loyalty, it stops being about reality. It becomes language without meaning. You realize that believing something deeply isn't enough, that truth needs solitude, silence, doubt, that the moment it becomes too public, too agreed upon, it turns into something else entirely, something like propaganda, even when it started as something pure. And the irony is, the more you try to defend the truth, the more you contribute to its erosion. The more loudly you say it, the less anyone feels it. You begin to wonder if the most honest thing you can do is say nothing at all. Because the real danger isn't that people won't believe the truth. It's that they'll believe it too easily, too quickly, without pain, without cost, without thinking. And when that happens, the truth becomes worse than a lie. It becomes noise, empty, recycled, weaponized, safe. And maybe that's the final collapse. Not when the truth is denied, but when it's believed by everyone and no longer means anything at all. You remember it, like it was yesterday. The way the light looked, the way your chest felt, how time seemed to stretch, soft and slow. Maybe it was your birthday, or the end of something hard, or just a moment when everything felt easy and safe and right. And maybe it still makes you smile, even now. But here's the part you never think about. That day, your happiest day, might have been the worst day of someone else's life. Not just in the abstract, not theoretically, literally. Somewhere close or far, someone was breaking. Someone was sitting in a hospital room, or a jail cell, or in the wreckage of something they thought would last forever. While you were laughing, while you were surrounded by people who loved you, while you were thinking, I hope this never ends. And maybe that doesn't sound surprising. You already know the world is full of pain. You know joy and sorrow coexist. But there's a difference between understanding that in theory and realizing that your memory, the one you return to, the one you protect, is built on a date someone else can't forget for entirely different reasons. Maybe the song that played in the background that day was the same song that played at someone's funeral. Maybe the person who held your hand let go of someone else's just moments earlier. Maybe the city where you celebrated was where someone else fled, barefoot, from something they couldn't bear. You'll never know for sure. That's what makes this so quiet, so hard to hold. The way joy can feel so absolute in one direction, and yet in the other be tangled with something completely unrecognizable. The way the same moment can be sacred and cursed, depending on where you were standing. We like to think of happiness as pure, clean, separate from pain. We tell ourselves we deserve it, that it came to us because of something good, something earned. But it didn't. Not really. It came randomly, coincidentally. It landed on you and not on someone else, for reasons you'll never fully understand. And maybe that's fine, maybe it has to be. But it gets harder when you realize that some of your happiest moments weren't just parallel to someone else's pain, they were entangled with it. The job you got was the job someone else needed to feed their child. The partner who made you whole was the same one someone else couldn't forget. The home you found peace in was built on land someone once lost. The photo you framed, the story you tell, the memory you keep, it all came at a cost you never saw, to someone you never knew. And now you start to wonder what that means. Does your joy still shine the same way, now that you know what it shadows? Can you still celebrate something that hurt someone else? Is your happiness only possible because you've chosen not to see the full picture? To tell yourself it's not your fault, that you didn't intend it, that you couldn't have known, and all of that is true. But does that change anything? Does innocence undo impact? You think of it now more often than you used to, not with guilt, exactly, but with a kind of weight, a quiet acknowledgement that every joy, every comfort, every good thing that felt like it was yours alone wasn't. It was shared, whether you realized it or not. Shared across fault lines you didn't see. Shared with people who never agreed to give it up. You start to look differently at your memories. You start to hear the silence around them, the missing voices, the untold parts, and it doesn't ruin them, but it changes them, softens the edges, makes them feel a little less clean. And maybe that's how it should be. Not everything needs to be pure to matter. Not every moment needs to be untouched, to be real. But it does mean you can't keep pretending your joy was free, that it came without cost, that it belonged only to you. Because someone, somewhere, still lives with the echo of that day. And for them, it doesn't feel like nostalgia. It feels like grief. And the part that stays with you isn't the contrast. It's the overlap. The idea that the exact same second could contain such different truths. The same minute, the same hour, the same afternoon, etched forever into two different hearts for two completely opposite reasons. And you'll never know who they are. You'll never hear their story. But they were there while you were smiling. And somehow, the day that made you whole was the day that quietly broke them. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. It looks ordinary, smooth glass, thin frame, soft light. But this mirror doesn't reflect your face. It shows something else. It shows the people in your life who secretly hate you, not just dislike, not annoyance or rivalry. Quiet, buried, fully hidden hatred. You lean closer. Names appear, faces. Some are expected. People you've hurt, people you've argued with. But then, others. People you trust. People you care about. Someone who laughed at your joke yesterday. Someone who hugged you last week. Their name glows just the same. You try to tell yourself it's wrong, that the mirror must be broken. But it isn't. It's precise. It doesn't show accidents or misunderstandings. It shows the truth. Real, enduring hatred that lives behind polite smiles and warm greetings. You start scanning each name, wondering why, replaying every conversation, every moment, trying to pinpoint the second something broke. But the mirror offers no explanations, only the fact. You think about asking them, testing the mirror, seeing if anyone admits it, but you already know how it will go. They'll deny it, confuse you, smile, laugh, call you paranoid. They'll make you feel crazy for even suspecting it. And still, the mirror glows. You feel your trust erode, not all at once, but piece by piece. Every relationship becomes uncertain. You stop texting first. You reread old messages. You notice silences you once ignored. You stop believing the words people say because now you've seen behind them. At first, you tell yourself you can handle it, that knowing the truth is better than living in ignorance. But as the days pass, something else begins to grow inside you. A quiet, persistent paranoia. The mirror doesn't just show who hates you. It starts to change how you see everyone, even those it doesn't list. You begin to wonder, what if their hatred hasn't formed yet? What if it's growing, slowly, waiting? You start preparing for betrayals that haven't happened, distancing yourself before others get the chance. You rehearse conversations, test boundaries, push people away just to see how easily they'll let go. Some do. And with every person you lose, part of you wonders whether you were right to begin with, or whether the mirror showed only a moment, fleeting, impulsive, never meant to last, and you turned it into destiny. But by now, it's too late. The mirror is part of you, not the object, but the effect. The knowledge that the surface of people rarely matches what lies underneath. That love can mask hatred. That closeness can hide resentment. You start thinking about yourself differently. How many people have you smiled at while secretly resenting them? How often have you played a role, said the right thing, hidden the truth? You try to remember if you've ever been fully honest with anyone, completely unfiltered. No image, no performance. You struggle to think of even one time. And then a darker thought emerges. What if someone else has a mirror too? What if they've seen your name on their list? What if they saw it years ago and they've been pretending ever since? Keeping you close, smiling politely, while quietly building their escape. What if every conversation you've ever had was shadowed by a mirror you couldn't see? You find yourself longing for ignorance, for the old blurry trust, for believing people meant what they said. But you can't go back. Once you've seen the reflection, it doesn't leave you. You start avoiding the mirror, covering it, locking the room. But even without it, the knowledge remains. Every silence feels sharper. Every compliment feels rehearsed. Every relationship becomes a question you can't answer. And now you're trapped, because you don't know which part was worse, the hatred that existed in secret, or the person you've become because you discovered it. You tell yourself you still want connection, still want love, still want closeness. But you've made it impossible. You've become someone who doubts every kindness, someone who flinches when touched, someone who studies every word for signs of betrayal. Maybe the mirror didn't show you who hated you. Maybe it just showed you how easy it is to hate, once you believe you've been deceived. Would you really erase it if you knew it meant losing the part of yourself that remembers why? There's a memory in your mind that hurts. Maybe it's small, a moment of humiliation, a betrayal, a truth you weren't ready for. Or maybe it's something deeper, grief that stayed too long, guilt that never softened, pain you never learned how to carry. You tell yourself the memory isn't who you are, that it's just a scar. And if you could take it away, you would finally be free. And now, you're given the choice. A procedure, simple, safe, effective. One memory erased forever. You won't remember the pain, the moment, the person, no side effects, no complications, except one. The memory doesn't disappear cleanly. It takes a part of you with it. The self that formed around it, the version of you who endured it, survived it, was changed by it. That person vanishes too. Not all at once, Not in some dramatic way, just gone, quietly, silently, as if they never existed. You'll still wake up in the same body, still speak with the same voice. But something fundamental shifts. You won't know what. You won't feel it directly. But people will. Conversations will drift strangely. Certain places will feel unfamiliar. Your reactions, your preferences, your instincts, some will change, not violently, just slightly, enough for others to notice before you do. And eventually you will notice that you don't cry in the same moments, that certain songs no longer mean anything, that the silence in your head is different, quieter, but not in a peaceful way, more like an absence, a hollow space you can't explain. You told yourself the memory was just pain, but it was also context, anchor, meaning. It was the reason you distrust certain words, the reason you look away at certain times, the reason you recognize certain dangers before others do. You thought it held you back, but maybe it was holding you together. What happens when you forget the worst thing that ever happened to you, but also forget how to recognize it happening again? You wouldn't just lose pain, you'd lose protection, you'd lose clarity, you'd lose the knowledge carved into you by survival, and in its place, nothing. Not peace, not joy, just unknowing. The kind of blankness that makes you vulnerable again, open again, soft again, in all the places you learned to harden. And what about the people who knew that version of you? The ones who saw you suffer, who helped you through it. They'll still remember. They'll speak to that part of you as if it's still there. They'll reference moments you no longer recall. They'll say things you no longer understand. You'll smile politely, nod, pretend. But deep down, something in you will ache. Not because you miss the memory, but because you know something is missing, something important. And you'll never know what. You'll wonder what you lost. You'll wonder what you used to feel when you looked at certain photographs or heard certain names. You'll wonder if the person you were would recognize who you've become, and you'll never be able to answer, because the memory isn't just an event, it's a foundation. It's how you learned what matters, what hurts, what love isn't. It's how you became cautious, or brave, or quiet. It shaped how you walk into rooms, how you end conversations, how you sit with silence. Erase it, and you erase the self that learned to live around it. The self who fought through the aftermath, the one who changed, slowly, painfully, into someone stronger, or sadder, or wiser. But you won't feel that immediately. That's the trick. The moment after the erasure, you'll feel light, as if a weight has lifted. You'll think you made the right decision. You'll even smile, for a while. Then one day, weeks or months later, you'll make a decision that surprises you. A choice you can't justify. An instinct that feels foreign. And in that moment, you'll feel disconnected from yourself. Like watching a stranger move your hands, and you'll begin to realize that something fundamental has shifted. That some part of you isn't coming back. You won't grieve the memory. You'll grieve the absence of grief. The absence of weight. The absence of the familiar ache that used to remind you who you were. Because memories don't just hold pain, they hold continuity. They are the thread that ties together who you were, who you are, and who you might become. And pulling that thread, no matter how small, unravels more than you expect. So the question isn't just, would you erase the memory? It's, are you ready to lose the version of yourself that remembered it? And if you are you sure you'll like who's left? What if intelligence doesn't protect you from lies, but makes you more vulnerable to them? You've seen it. A person with degrees, credentials, a sharp mind, believing something that seems obviously false, not just casually believing it, but defending it, building entire frameworks around it, explaining it in detail. laughing at those who disagree. And you wonder how someone so smart can be so wrong. But maybe you already know the answer. Smart people don't believe fewer lies. They believe better ones, more complicated, more elegant. Lies that sound like truth because they're wrapped in logic, supported by data, and protected by confidence. The lie becomes more convincing, not despite their intelligence, but because of it. Because intelligence doesn't just process facts, it builds narratives, it defends beliefs, it rationalizes. The smarter you are, the faster you connect ideas, the more effortlessly you justify what you already want to believe. Intelligence becomes a weapon, but not against falsehood, against doubt. You've probably done it yourself. Faced with something uncomfortable, uncertain, or threatening, you don't ask whether it's true. You ask how it could be true. You start with the answer you want, then work backwards, carefully, strategically, without even realizing it. And once you've built the structure, it's hard to let go. Not because the lie is especially convincing, but because you built it. You shaped it with your own hands. To tear it down would mean admitting you misused your strength, that your greatest skill became your greatest weakness. The danger isn't just personal, it's cultural, because when intelligent people fall for lies, they don't just fall silently. They speak, they write, they teach, they create systems around their beliefs. And the smarter they are, the harder they are to challenge. Not because their ideas are right, but because they've already anticipated every objection. They know how to make you feel stupid for disagreeing, how to turn questions into traps, how to shift the burden of proof, manipulate definitions, outpace your logic. And by the end of the conversation, you're not sure what you believe anymore, only that you lost. You might think the solution is more intelligence, more education. But that's the trap. Intelligence doesn't guard against deception. It just builds more convincing versions of it. It's not that smart people believe more lies. It's that they need better lies to satisfy their minds. So the lies evolve. They get sharper, more precise, more aligned with ego, ideology, self-image. They don't sound like propaganda. They sound like insight, like wisdom, like something only a select few can truly understand. And here's the deeper problem. Smart people often believe they can't be fooled, that they're the ones who see through the manipulation, that their intellect gives them immunity. But it's the opposite. The more you believe you're immune, the less you examine what you believe, the less you doubt, the more vulnerable you become. And then there's the matter of pride. The smarter you are, the more invested you are in your ideas. You don't just hold beliefs, you craft them. You build identities around them, communities, reputations. It's not just a belief, it's who you are. And what happens if it's wrong? If the thing you've defended for years, the thing you've used to define yourself, is false, where does that leave you? Sometimes it's easier to go deeper, to reinforce the lie, to find new evidence, new theories, new language to justify it. Because admitting you were wrong would mean rewriting everything, and even a brilliant mind might prefer delusion to that. And now you see the real danger. Intelligence doesn't prevent deception, it buries it, it decorates it, it turns it into a fortress. And if you're smart enough, you'll never need to leave that fortress. You'll always find a way to stay inside, comfortable, untouchable, wrong. So maybe the question isn't, how smart are you? Maybe it's, how willing are you to be wrong? Because in the end, it's not intelligence that protects you from lies, it's humility. And that's the one thing no test can measure. What if you only feel guilt when someone else is there to see it? Not because their judgment matters, but because your own doesn't. Because deep down, you don't actually trust yourself to feel bad unless someone else confirms that you should. You picture yourself doing something wrong, lying, stealing, betraying. And if no one saw, would you still feel the weight of it? Would your stomach turn? Would your chest tighten? Would your breath catch in your throat? Or would it feel like nothing at all? You tell yourself you're a moral person, that you'd still feel guilty, even in absolute privacy. But how sure are you of that? Is your guilt a signal of internal values, or just a response to potential consequences, not punishment, necessarily? Just the look, the gaze, the quiet disapproval of someone who knows what you did. Think back, the worst guilt you've ever felt. Was it private, or was it shared, revealed, exposed? Maybe guilt only hurts when it's illuminated, when someone else holds up a mirror and shows you who you are. Alone in the dark, you can explain it away. You can reframe, justify, forget. But when someone sees you, truly sees you, there's nowhere left to hide. And now you wonder if morality itself is real without witnesses. Is a private conscience enough to keep someone from doing harm? Is chose for social pressure? Maybe guilt isn't about right or wrong at all. Maybe it's about identity. The person you think you are, the person others believe you to be. And when those two images collide, guilt is what you feel in the wreckage. But imagine this, you're given the chance to do something truly awful. Not a mistake, not a slip, but a deliberate harm. And you're told no one will ever find out. Not now, not later, not ever. No evidence, no trace, no consequence. Just you and your choice. Would you feel the same resistance? Or does your moral clarity depend entirely on the idea that someone might one day judge you? Maybe this is why confessions feel relieving. Not because they absolve the action, but because they reintroduce an observer. Someone to see your guilt, to confirm its presence. Someone to remind you that you're still capable of feeling bad, even when it's too late. Without that, the guilt stays vague, uncertain, ungrounded. You wonder if it's even real. Now think about the opposite. Think about doing something good, purely good, but no one ever knows. No thanks, no recognition, no acknowledgement. Does it feel complete? Or do you secretly crave the validation, the look, the nod, the tiny signal that says yes, you did the right thing? You start to realize how much of your emotional world is built around being seen. Not watched in the paranoid sense. Seen, acknowledged, reflected. Without that, your feelings drift. Guilt fades. Pride dissolves. Morality becomes weightless. So what does that mean for who you are when no one is watching? Are you the same person in darkness that you are in light? Do your values persist in silence, or do they vanish the moment eyes are gone? And more disturbingly, have you already tested this? In small ways. Lies that went unpunished. Betrayals no one ever found out. Things you did that you buried quietly. You tell yourself they were minor, justifiable, harmless. But deep down, the reason you've forgotten them isn't because they don't matter, it's because no one saw. And maybe the scariest part isn't that you sometimes do wrong when you're alone. It's that you don't feel wrong, that you don't even notice. That without others to reflect your morality back to you, the signal goes dead. Now imagine a world where no one ever watches. No gods, no cameras, no other minds, just you, always, forever. Would you still be good? Would you still feel guilt? Or would that feeling disappear entirely, like a muscle that's never used? And if that's true, if guilt only exists in the presence of others, then what does that say about the self you believe in? The version of you that's good, kind, moral, does that version vanish in solitude? You begin to suspect that morality isn't a property of the soul, it's a performance. Not in a fake or cynical way, but in the way music is only music when it's heard. Alone, you can still play the notes, but they don't sound the same. They don't echo. There's no response, no resonance. So the question isn't whether you'd do the right thing if no one was watching. It's whether you'd even know what the right thing was, whether you'd feel anything at all. And the more you sit with this, the quieter it gets inside, until you realize the most unsettling possibility of all. You don't feel guilt when you're alone. You feel nothing. Everyone who's ever helped you wanted something. That thought doesn't sit well. It feels cold, ungrateful, even paranoid. But let it linger a little longer. Turn it over. Don't run from it. Just ask, what if it's true? You think about the people who've shown you kindness. Family, friends, strangers, the ones who gave you money, time, advice, the ones who listened when you needed to talk, who held you when you broke down. It felt like love or generosity or selflessness. But now you're wondering, what was it really? Maybe they wanted to feel needed. Maybe they wanted to be seen as good. Maybe they wanted to be loved back, or owed, or remembered. Maybe they didn't want anything conscious. Maybe they didn't even know what they wanted. But somewhere inside them, somewhere quiet and hidden, was there still a need? Some version of I want something in return. You start to think about the way people help, the way they lean in with concern, the way they linger, waiting for thanks. The way they tell others what they did for you. The way they remind you of it later, gently, like a debt. The way help turns into leverage. But it doesn't always look like manipulation. Sometimes it's subtle. They want to be appreciated, respected, admired. They want to feel like good people. They want the story of themselves to be one they're proud of. So they help, not to save you, but to save that story. And what about you? Think of the times you helped someone else, gave your time, your attention, your support. Did you really do it without wanting anything back? Not even a thank you, not even the soft, warm feeling of being needed. You start to notice how deeply transactional it all is. Not in money, not in favors, but in emotional currency. Approval, gratitude, power, image. Even the smallest acts, holding a door open, offering a compliment, checking in, carry a hidden cost, a quiet expectation, a pull. You think about the moments that hurt the most, not betrayals, not fights, but when someone helped you and then made you feel like you owed them, when support came with a weight, when kindness was a disguise for control, and you realize this isn't rare, it's common, normal, even. Help is rarely clean. It's almost always tangled in something else. A need to be needed, a fear of being forgotten, a hunger to matter. Help becomes a way to keep people close, to shape how they see you, to shape how you see yourself. Even love can be like this, especially love. Parents who sacrifice everything, but remind you, over and over, how much they gave up. Partners who support you, then expect obedience in return. Friends who show up until you stop playing the role they need you to play. You want to believe in pure intention, in selflessness, in giving without needing. But where do you see it? When someone helps you, do they disappear afterward, expecting nothing? Or do they stay watching, hoping, needing something from you in return? And what does that do to you? It changes the way you receive help. You start to question it, doubt it, wonder what it means, what it costs, what it's for. Even when someone offers kindness, a small part of you flinches, waits, wonders. You stop seeing help as help. You start seeing it as negotiation. A quiet agreement. I will take care of you, but you will give me something back, even if you don't know what it is yet. But this isn't just about others, it's about you too. The guilt you feel when someone helps you, the need to repay, the discomfort that creeps in when the debt lingers too long. You don't want to feel owned. You don't want to feel watched. You thank them. You praise them. You give something back. And if you can't, you pull away. The shame becomes too loud. Now you think about the people you've cut off. Was it because they hurt you, or because their help became too heavy? Because every act of kindness turned into something you owed, something you couldn't pay. You begin to see that maybe help is never really about the person being helped. It's about the helper, about their need, their story, their fear, their hunger. You just happen to be the place where they put it. And that's what makes this so difficult. You want to be grateful. You want to believe in goodness. But now you see that goodness is complicated. It's rarely pure. Often it's a mask, a means to an end, an echo of something unresolved. You think of all the people you've leaned on. You wonder what they really wanted. You wonder what you really gave. And you wonder how much of your life has been shaped, not by generosity, but by quiet transactions no one admitted were happening. You look back on every time someone showed up for you, and now for the first time you ask not just why they helped, but what they needed, and you can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. You can't go back, because now you understand something you didn't want to. That even in your most fragile, vulnerable moments, when you were breaking, bleeding, begging for support, the hands that reached out to catch you were not empty. They were already holding something, quietly, tightly, and they never let go. You say you'd never betray them. Not them. Not the person who knows you better than anyone else. The one who stood by you, who held your secrets, who trusted you when no one else did. But you will, not because you want to, not because you're cruel, but because it's inevitable. There will come a moment, quiet, unremarkable, when you say the wrong thing, when you're too tired to care, when your pride outweighs your patience. And in that moment, you'll become the one who hurts them. Maybe not in a dramatic way. Maybe just a cold tone, a missed call, a silence that cuts deeper than words. And they'll feel it. They won't say anything, not right away, but something inside them will recoil. Trust is soft, and it doesn't bleed when it breaks. It withers silently. You'll think it's nothing, a small mistake. They'll get over it. But they don't, because it wasn't just a word or a gesture. It was you. It was the person they thought wouldn't be like everyone else. And now you're exactly like them. You'll try to fix it. You'll apologize, explain, rationalize. But trust doesn't respond to logic. It remembers the feeling, not the reason. And here's the part you don't want to admit. This won't be the last time. The closer you are to someone, the more fragile everything becomes. They know where your sharp edges are, and you know where theirs are too. You both have the power to destroy each other, not with violence, but with something far worse, intimacy. The person you trust most is the one you've armed with every tool they need to hurt you, and you've taken the same weapons into your own hands. You think love protects you. That trust builds safety. But trust isn't armor, it's exposure. It's stepping into the open, again and again, hoping the other person won't pull the trigger. But sometimes you do, not out of malice, but out of fear, out of pain, out of the simple selfish instinct to protect yourself first. You say the thing that wins the argument, not the one that preserves the connection. You shut down, walk away, lie by omission, lash out just enough to feel in control again. And they notice. You may not see the shift, it's subtle, a look that lasts half a second longer, a word they don't say anymore, a part of themselves they no longer offer. That's how trust erodes, not in collapses, but in quiet retreats. And then you wonder why things feel different, why they don't laugh the same way, why the conversations don't go as deep, why they seem further away, even when they're right in front of you. You tell yourself it's life, stress, timing, anything but you. But deep down, you know. You remember the moment you chose yourself over them. You remember the glance, the tone, the choice not to care enough. It lingers. It always does. You didn't mean to hurt them, but intent doesn't undo damage. And maybe you think you're different, that your bond is stronger, that real trust can survive these fractures. Sometimes it can, but even then, something changes. Because the person who once looked at you and felt safe now looks at you and remembers a moment of doubt. A moment when you proved you could become a stranger. And that knowledge never fully leaves. You still love them, you still mean well. But the part of them that once felt invincible with you now feels exposed, cautious, slightly removed. You don't want this to be true, but it is. Because love doesn't make us perfect. It just gives us more ways to hurt each other. And trust doesn't prevent betrayal. It just makes the betrayal matter more. So eventually, you will hurt them. Maybe not today. Maybe not in a way you recognize. But it will happen. And when it does, you'll realize something even harder. They'll hurt you too. And both of you will have to decide what comes next. Whether to rebuild what was lost, or to quietly live among the ruins, pretending it still feels like home. Imagine someone makes an exact copy of you. Every memory, every habit, every flaw, perfectly duplicated. The original you is quietly destroyed. No pain, no warning, just gone. The copy wakes up, steps into your life, and continues on. They look like you, think like you, love the same people, fear the same things. They don't know they're a copy. They believe they are you. Are they wrong? If everything feels continuous, if all the memories line up, if every sensation flows naturally from the last, then what does it even mean to say they're not the original? If identity is just the sum of memory and consciousness in motion, then isn't the copy just as real as the person who came before? But something in you resists this. It feels like a trick, a sleight of hand, because somewhere in the back of your mind there's a quiet, stubborn belief that continuity isn't enough, that there's something else, some invisible thread tying you to yourself. And once it's cut, you're gone, no matter how perfect the replica. You try to define it. A soul, maybe. Or a spark of awareness that can't be reproduced. But every attempt to describe it dissolves under scrutiny. Every test you apply to prove the copy you can be explained away. The memories match, the choices align, the sense of self continues. Maybe the problem is that you're asking the wrong question. Maybe the issue isn't whether the copy is really you. Maybe it's that you don't want to believe you could vanish so quietly, that someone else could take your place, and no one, not even them, would notice the difference. Because if they're convinced they're you, if they carry your regrets, your joys, your secrets, then from the outside, and even from the inside, they are you. The only person who could ever know otherwise is already gone. So you start to wonder, what if that's already happened? What if sometime in your past you were replaced? A moment of unconsciousness, a surgery, an accident, and now it's someone else walking around in your body, carrying your name. Would you even be able to tell? If consciousness is just a chain of moments, and memory the glue between them, then there's nothing to detect the break. You could be the copy right now, living a life that started with someone else. You want to reject this. You want to believe you'd know, that there'd be some feeling, some fracture, some sign that you're not the original. But think about every time you've gone under anesthesia, every time you've fallen asleep. Time disappears, and when you wake, you just assume continuity. But that's not proof. It's just a habit of belief. So what if identity is more fragile than you thought? What if your sense of being you is a comforting illusion, useful but not real? What if your entire life is just a performance stitched together from memories and impulses that could be replicated endlessly? Now you're faced with something darker. Not the fear of death, but the fear of replacement. The idea that what matters isn't whether you survive, but whether the illusion of you continues. And if no one can tell the difference, then maybe there is no difference. Maybe there never was. And that means your deepest fear isn't being erased. It's being replaced so perfectly that the world keeps going as if you never existed, as if you were never essential, never unique, just a temporary pattern, easily copied, effortlessly discarded. But it lingers. Because if the copy believes they're you, truly, fully, with no doubt, then from the inside, that belief is reality. And maybe that's the only version of selfhood that ever mattered. But still, you resist. Still, you insist that there's something irreplaceable about you, something no replica can hold. And yet, you can't say what it is. Because maybe the scariest part isn't that you're not the original, it's that you never were. Imagine floating in a room where up has no meaning, where your body drifts gently in silence, untethered by gravity, and every direction feels equally meaningless. Now imagine someone screams. There's no floor to run across, no ceiling to climb toward. Just an endless drift, forward, backward, sideways, none of it grounded. The scream cuts through the air again, and this time you realize someone needs help. But there's a problem. You don't know which way the scream is coming from. You spin your body, push off a surface, drift through the air. But it's all guesswork. There's no pull, no reference point, no weight to guide your sense of direction. The room is a maze with no orientation. And suddenly, you're not just lost physically, you're morally lost too. Because in zero gravity, responsibility becomes slippery. Imagine 3 people are floating. Unconscious, one is drifting slowly toward an airlock that's about to open. If they reach it, they'll be pulled into space and die. But they're not the only ones in danger. On the other side of the room, 2 others are drifting toward a different hazard, a ruptured tank leaking toxic gas. You can only reach one group in time. Who do you save? You want to act quickly, but nothing feels urgent when everything moves slowly and silently. Your body floats gently, your arms move with effort, but nothing you do feels immediate. And in that slow motion, your mind begins to ask questions. What if the one heading for the airlock is someone you know? What if the other 2 are strangers? What if the airlock opens sooner than expected and you misjudge the time? You had seconds to act, but time doesn't feel the same here. It stretches and warps, like your own sense of right and wrong. Back on Earth, you might have rushed forward instinctively, pulled by gravity, pushed by training or habit. But here, instinct doesn't help you. Movement requires intention. Every action demands a plan. Even turning your head has consequences. Momentum sends your body drifting in the opposite direction. So morality too becomes weightless, detached from its usual anchors. You think of consequences, but even consequences feel abstract when you're floating. You save one person, and their body collides with a wall, bouncing off, unconscious still. Did you help them? Or did you just change the direction of their suffering? Now imagine someone else is with you. A colleague. They suggest you sacrifice one of the unconscious to seal the airlock manually. The panel is jammed. A body would stop it from opening, but they can't say who. It's random, maybe even decided by proximity. Whoever's closest gets pushed into the mechanism. You're not killing them. Exactly. You're preventing 4 deaths by allowing 1. But the act doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like logistics, like repositioning mass in a vacuum. And that's what begins to unsettle you. How easily human life feels like mass here, like weightless cargo. How decisions that once felt heavy now feel frictionless. You push a person slightly and they drift away forever. No scream, no resistance, just movement and silence. You start to think about Earth differently. How many of your moral instincts depend on weight, on gravity, on ground, on seeing someone fall and wanting to catch them, on hearing footsteps run toward danger, on pressure, contact, resistance? Here, none of that exists. So what happens to morality in a place where action requires no effort and consequences unfold like a slow-motion dream? Maybe that's why people become so calm in space. Not because it's peaceful, but because everything feels disconnected. Violence feels theoretical. Sacrifice feels neat. Even death can seem silent, gentle, float into the void, drift into the wall, disappear without sound. But something inside you starts to resist this calm. You feel a growing unease, not because you're unsure what to do, but because you're unsure if your certainty means anything anymore. What does guilt feel like in zero gravity? Is it lighter, easier to ignore? Imagine you make your choice. You seal the airlock with a body. You save 4 people. They never know what you did. No one does. And you float there afterward, alone. You replay the moment. Not the logic, not the outcome, but the motion. The way their body floated away from you. The way your hands barely had to push. Would it feel like you killed someone, or just nudged them? On Earth, morality has weight. You feel it in your chest, in your stomach, in your hands. Here, you're not sure anymore. You start to wonder, was it easier to do something terrible simply because it didn't feel heavy? And now you begin to fear something deeper. That morality for you was never about right and wrong. It was about sensation, about friction, about how hard it was to commit the act. And without that friction, what's left? If killing feels effortless, does that make it easier to justify? If you never feel resistance, do you start to believe you're still good? Maybe that's the most dangerous thing about zero gravity. Not that it changes physics, but that it changes you quietly, invisibly, without you noticing. Because when morality floats weightless, so do you. And sometimes you drift so far, you can't find your way back. What if there's no up and no down? What if morality depends on gravity? Imagine a space station orbiting Earth in perfect silence. Inside, a crew of scientists and engineers goes about their tasks, floating, untethered. Every movement is slow, deliberate. In zero gravity, there's no floor to stand on, no natural sense of direction. What's above you could just as easily be below. Perspective becomes arbitrary. Now imagine something goes wrong. A fire breaks out in one section. Alarms blare. Emergency protocols activate. You're the mission commander. There are 10 crew members. One of them is trapped behind a jammed hatch. Smoke is filling the corridor. You're holding the control panel, and there's a choice: vent the air from that section, kill the one, or delay. Try a rescue and risk the rest. On Earth, this would be called a moral dilemma. In space, something shifts. There's no gravity to ground your instincts, no up to orient your thinking. In zero gravity, physical distance means something else. The trapped crewmate isn't just down the hall. They're drifting, unreachable. Time behaves differently when every second stretches between bodies suspended in nothing. The logic seems clear. 1 life against 9. But it doesn't feel clear, because in this weightless environment, even moral weight loses shape. On earth, we feel the weight of our choices. We speak in terms of burden and conscience. We say we carry guilt, carry shame. But in zero gravity, nothing can be carried. Every emotion floats beside you. Every consequence spins around you, detached. You can't even feel the floor beneath your feet to remind you where you stand. So what do you stand for? In space, pushing someone away doesn't feel like aggression. It's just motion. If you push someone, you move in the opposite direction. Force is equal. Opposite, always mutual. Cause and effect are disorienting. When every action unanchors you, suppose a crew member panics, begins threatening the mission. They're not violent, but unstable, risking everyone's survival. On Earth you might restrain them, hold them down, but here, there's nothing to hold them against. To stop them, you have to eject them. Literally push them out, into the void. You don't mean to kill them. You just want to protect the rest. But in space, protection and execution blur. The terrifying part isn't the decision. It's how easily the context makes it feel reasonable. How softly the moral ground shifts, without you noticing. Now consider something worse. Imagine someone on the crew starts exploiting this disorientation, using the weightlessness as a way to absolve themselves. They harm others, not with violence, but through denial. I didn't shove her. I just moved. It wasn't murder, it was motion. The lack of gravity becomes a shield. At loophole, you try to hold them accountable, but the others hesitate. Not because they don't care, but because here, it's hard to know what counts as harm. No bruises from impact. No screams echo through the vacuum. The boundaries blur. Eventually someone floats by you and whispers, "It's not the same up here," and you begin to believe them. Back on Earth, we rely on shared frames of reference. We point and say there, this way. Look up. We orient ourselves morally the same way, by consensus. But in space, those reference points dissolve. There's no natural orientation to snap your compass to. Everyone drifts with their own idea of center. Morality becomes rotational, relative to where you're floating. When the moment comes, now ask yourself this: if you lived long enough in zero gravity, would you lose the ability to judge at all? Would morality become a habit tied to the feeling of weight, of pressure, of ground? And if so, was it ever real, or was it always just another effect of gravity? What if the only thing holding your ethics together was the feeling of standing still? What happens when you no longer know which way is down? Because in zero gravity, every direction feels the same. Every choice feels unanchored. And eventually, so do you. Would you do it? Not in theory, not from a distance. I mean with your hands, with your eyes locked on theirs. Would you torture your child to stop a bomb? The bomb is real. It's already armed. It's hidden in a crowded city. You don't know where, but you do know who placed it. And that person will only talk if you make your child suffer. Not frighten, not scare. Hurt, deeply, repeatedly, until it breaks them. Because that's what will break the bomber, not your pain, theirs. You're told there's no other way, no time for kindness, no time for cleverness. The child must scream, and you must be the reason why. You look at them, still small, still trusting. Their face turns to yours, confused. You're holding something sharp now. You see the fear start to rise. They don't understand yet, but they will, soon. You want to believe you wouldn't, that you couldn't, that no cause could justify this. But what if the bomb will kill 1,000 people? 10,000? 1,000,000? What if someone you love is in that city right now? What if not torturing your child means watching others die, knowing you could have stopped it? You try to make it feel unreal, hypothetical, but it's not. You're alone in a room. Time is passing. Every second brings the explosion closer. The person who planted it, watches, silent, waiting. You can end it. All you have to do is begin. You want to hesitate. You want to say you'd find another way. But that's not what this is. This isn't about finding the right answer. It's about watching your principles dissolve when they cost too much. You think of morality like a shield, something that protects you from making monstrous choices. But here, morality doesn't help. It offers no shelter, no clarity. Only this: if you do nothing, people die. If you act, your child suffers. Both are unforgivable, and both are yours to choose. You tell yourself maybe you can fake it, hurt them just enough to fool the bomber. But pain doesn't lie. The person watching knows the difference between desperation and performance. They'll only talk if they see the real thing, if they see you cross the line. So now you ask yourself, what does it mean to be a parent? To protect your child at all costs? Or to protect the world from what you might do to them? Maybe the greater cruelty is doing nothing, letting the bomb explode, letting others suffer, so you don't have to feel the weight of what you've done. Is that mercy or cowardice? Who are you really saving? You might try to imagine someone else doing it, a stranger, an interrogator, anyone but you, but the bomber won't accept that. It has to be you. That's the point. Your child has to see it in your eyes. That's what makes it real. You might wonder if they'll forgive you one day, when they're older, when they understand. But that's a fantasy. They won't understand. Not fully. Not ever. The betrayal will live in them, whether they survive or not. And even if they say the words, you'll never believe them. Because you won't forgive yourself. You imagine the aftermath. The people saved. The explosion stopped. The relief on the news. The congratulations. But then you return home, to the silence. To the way your child flinches when you enter the room. To the marks on their body and the emptiness in their eyes. You wonder what exactly you saved and what exactly you destroyed. You might survive. You might even be thanked. But something inside you won't come back. Something sacred will be gone. And you won't get to decide what replaces it. You'll live the rest of your life knowing that your greatest act of courage was also your deepest betrayal. Sir, that you became the very thing you swore you'd protect them from. That you looked into their fear and chose to become its source. And still, you'll never be sure you did the right thing. Because maybe the bomber lied. Maybe the information was wrong. Maybe the bomb was fake. Or maybe it went off anyway. You'll never really know. You'll only remember their scream, the look in their eyes, the moment they stopped calling you Dad or Mom and just cried for help. So now you're left with a question that will never leave you. A question that isn't about ethics or logic. A question that lives in the pit of your stomach and never lets you rest. When the cost of saving others is your own child's suffering, do you still believe you're a good person? Or do you start to wonder if being good was just another thing you were willing to trade away? What if the only reason you help someone in pain is because their suffering makes you feel unsafe? Not unsafe in any physical way, but psychologically, emotionally. Like their agony reaches into something inside you and stirs it. You don't want them to hurt, not out of love or duty, but because their suffering disrupts your peace. And you want it to stop so you can feel better again. Think about that. Imagine someone you care about breaks down in front of you. They're sobbing, panicked, falling apart. You rush to comfort them. You say the right things, you hold them tightly, you offer help. But look deeper. Why are you really doing it? Maybe you can't bear to see them suffer because it reminds you of your own fragility, your own past, your own helplessness. Their pain reawakens your fears, and helping them becomes a way to silence those fears, to make things clean again. Or maybe you're afraid of what it means if you don't help. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of guilt. Afraid of seeming cold. So you move toward them, but not out of care. Out of fear of what it would say about you if you didn't. What if that's what empathy really is? A survival instinct dressed up as compassion. A way to regulate our own discomfort, not someone else's. When we see suffering, it destabilizes us. So we soothe, we rescue, we console, not to lift others up, but to bring ourselves back to balance. Even children show distress when others cry. Not always because they understand pain, but because it scares them. They want the crying to stop. They want the world to feel safe again. And that impulse doesn't always disappear with age. It just gets better at pretending to be noble. Now imagine someone you don't like is hurting. Someone who has wronged you. Do you still feel that same urgent pull to help? Or does your empathy recede because their pain no longer threatens your comfort? Or imagine there's no one around to witness your response. No social reward, no praise, no validation. Do you still step forward? Or does your concern shrink quietly in the absence of an audience? And what if someone is suffering in silence? Not visibly, not loudly, not in a way that disturbs you. Do you even notice? Do you care? You begin to see the pattern. Your empathy flares up when pain becomes intrusive. When it crosses into your world, your mind, your emotional stability. But if it stays hidden, quiet, invisible, it doesn't reach you. It doesn't move you. And that suggests something disturbing. That maybe your compassion is less about others and more about yourself. A self-protective reflex to avoid distress. An act of internal housekeeping, disguised as moral concern. Even grief can follow this logic. When someone dies, we don't always mourn their suffering. We mourn the space they leave behind, the silence they create, the weight of their absence in our lives, the way it changes us. And then there's guilt, that strange emotion that masquerades as empathy. You see someone suffering and you feel responsible, not because you harmed them, but because their pain disrupts your sense of being a good person. So you try to help, not to heal them, but to restore your own self-image. It's subtle, but powerful, and it casts a long shadow over every act of kindness, every offer of comfort, every word of support. Are you doing it for them? Or are you doing it so you don't have to feel the discomfort of doing nothing? What would empathy look like if it was stripped of fear? Would it still exist? Or would it dissolve into something else entirely? Something quieter, less reactive, less concerned with control? Would it still drive you to act? Or would it simply sit beside pain without needing to fix it? You may never know for certain, because the impulse to help will always feel right. It will always feel good. But just beneath that goodness is something more fragile, a quiet desperation to avoid the feeling of helplessness, to shield yourself from the raw, destabilizing weight of another's suffering. So maybe the question isn't whether empathy is real. Maybe it's whether you can live with the idea that even your most caring instincts might be rooted in fear. Imagine waking up in a prison cell. The walls are cold, the air feels stale. You don't remember being arrested. You don't remember committing a crime. You ask the guard what you did. He looks at you, silent for a long time, and finally says you haven't done it yet. At first, you think it's a mistake, a cruel joke. But the more you ask, the more certain their answers become. They're not punishing you for something you did. They're punishing you for something you will do. Something terrible. Something irreversible. You won't say what, only that it's guaranteed. Inevitable. You insist you'd never hurt anyone. You beg for proof. But there isn't any. Not yet. That's the point. The sentence comes first. The crime comes later. And no one seems to see a problem with that. The others look at you like it makes perfect sense. It's not who you are now, they say. It's who you're becoming. They tell you you've been studied, tracked, profiled. They know your patterns. They've seen your path. Statistically, psychologically, historically, you will do it. And so this is justice. You try to explain that people can change, that knowing your future makes you determined to resist it. But they shake their heads. They say that's exactly what someone like you would say. That your denial isn't a defense, it's part of the pattern. You begin to doubt yourself, not because you believe them, but because they seem so certain. Their calmness makes your protests sound unhinged. And then you wonder, what if they're right? What if something inside you really is twisted and you just haven't reached the moment yet? You start to comb your past for signs. You analyze every failure, every moment of anger, every thought you wish you hadn't had. You wonder if those were warnings. Harmless then, dangerous now. You feel yourself becoming the very person they've described, not because you were, but because you've been treated like you are. You think about how punishment changes people, how being seen as a threat can turn someone into one. You were innocent, but now you're angry, confused, alone. If you lash out now, would that prove them right, or would it prove that they created what they claim to predict? You ask again what it is you'll do. They still won't say. Only that if they told you, it might accelerate things. That your knowledge of your future crime could be the very thing that brings it about. So you're left in silence with your own imagination, and that's worse. You start inventing possibilities. Maybe you'll hurt someone you love. Maybe you'll betray a friend. Maybe you'll destroy something important. You begin to see yourself as dangerous, even when you're doing nothing. The fear of what you might do becomes a constant pressure. Others come to visit. Some say they understand that you're not bad, just unlucky. Born into the wrong conditions, exposed to the wrong patterns. One even says they admire you, because someone has to carry the burden of being the example. Someone has to suffer, so others don't have to. You want to scream. You want to ask why no one is helping you prevent this future. Why no one is trying to guide you, rehabilitate you, intervene in a way that's humane. But then you realize they're not trying to stop the future. They're trying to punish it. You begin to wonder what justice even means. If it's not about what you've done, but what you might do, what separates justice from control? And if someone is capable of doing wrong but never does, are they still guilty? Or does potential only matter when it becomes real? You remember times in your life when you almost made a terrible choice, but you didn't. That mattered. That meant something. But here, it doesn't. The system you're in doesn't reward restraint. It doesn't trust redemption. It only sees the endpoint and acts as if it's already here. Now imagine your time is almost up. Not your sentence, your life, and you never committed the crime. Maybe you were never going to, or maybe you were, and the punishment stopped you. You'll never know. No one will. All they'll remember is that you were a threat, a risk that had to be managed, and that's the part that stays with you. The way a possible future became more real than your actual past. The way the mere idea of who you could be erased, everything you've already done, every kindness, every effort, every struggle to be better. You sit in silence, wondering if you've been protected from your worst self, or punished for a self that never existed. And then the cell door opens. But it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like you've just become the person they always feared you would be. You see a crime happen, but your mind tells you it didn't. Not because you forgot, not because it was confusing or unclear. You saw it. A man grabbed a woman by the throat in the parking lot. You heard her cry out. You saw her fall. You watched him run. But then, later, it just didn't feel like that's what happened. You weren't sure. Your memory softened. Doubt crept in. Maybe they knew each other. Maybe she tripped. Maybe it wasn't that violent. Maybe you're exaggerating. You replay the scene in your head, again and again. But the more you try to remember it clearly, the less clear it becomes. Now her voice sounds different. Now you can't remember if she was afraid or just startled. Now you wonder if the man even ran. Maybe he walked. Maybe he helped her up. Maybe you made the whole thing worse in your mind than it really was, but you didn't. Not at first. At first you knew exactly what you saw, and that's what's so disturbing. Because this isn't about memory, it's about something deeper, something quieter. A kind of mental betrayal that doesn't feel like forgetting, it feels like rewriting. Your brain edits the memory like a film director, cutting a scene that doesn't fit the story. Not because it wants to lie, but because it wants to protect something. You, the world, a sense of safety, order, meaning. Because if the man really attacked her, then that means the world is not as safe as you want to believe. That violence can erupt anywhere. That strangers are not always harmless. That something terrible happened, and you were there, and you didn't stop it. So your mind softens it. Not to help the man, not to excuse what happened, but to let you live with it. This is where it gets darker, because you start to wonder, how often has this happened before? How many things have you seen, truly seen, that were later softened, blurred, erased, not because they weren't real, but because they didn't fit? You've heard of people doubting their own experiences, victims second-guessing what happened, witnesses unsure, reports inconsistent. You thought that was about trauma, fear, confusion. But maybe it's not just that. Maybe it's because the brain edits reality to protect the story it wants to believe. That the world makes sense. That people are mostly good. That things don't fall apart for no reason. But they do. And maybe you've seen it. Maybe you've seen more than you remember. Think about the man on the street you walked past last year. The one slumped on the ground. Was he asleep or unconscious? Or dead? You told yourself he was just resting. You kept walking. And maybe you were right. But maybe you weren't. How would you even know now? You think about moments in your past that feel strange, fragmented. You remember someone yelling. You remember someone crying. But the details are gone. What if that was on purpose? What if your mind decided not consciously, not deliberately, but instinctively, that the truth was too uncomfortable? You start to understand that the brain isn't built for truth. It's built for survival. And sometimes those things don't match, because truth can paralyze. It can overwhelm. It can make you feel helpless, and helplessness is dangerous. So the brain lies, softly, quietly. It lets you think the world is okay when it's not. It lets you think you would intervene if something bad happened, that you would help, that you would act. But how can you be sure? You saw a crime, and your brain erased it. What else has it erased? You try to force yourself back to the parking lot. You tell yourself to see it again, exactly as it was. But you can't. It's gone. Not blurry, not foggy. Gone. Rewritten. And now you feel it. This quiet horror, not just that something terrible happened, but that you can no longer trust your own mind to hold on to it. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. Because the truth isn't always what we see. Sometimes it's what we refuse to. And the most disturbing part isn't what the man did in that parking lot. It's that a part of you now hopes it wasn't real. Would you open the door? You're standing in front of it now. It's small, unmarked, quiet. They tell you what's behind it. Isn't dangerous, not physically. There's no monster, No trap, no violence, just the truth. But they don't say what kind of truth, only that it's real, pure, unfiltered, the kind of truth that strips away illusion completely. They say most people don't last long inside, a few seconds, maybe a minute, and their minds begin to fracture. They see too much, understand too much. Some scream, some laugh, some sit down and never speak again. Not because they're hurt, but because they've seen something they cannot hold. You wonder what it could be. What kind of truth could be so unbearable? Maybe it's about the world. Maybe you'd finally understand why everything is the way it is, why people suffer, why pain seems to repeat, why cruelty so often wins. You'd see the pattern behind the pattern, the mechanism behind injustice. Not just what happens, but why it must. Or maybe it's about you. Not the version you show others, not the story you tell yourself, but the actual core of what you are. The moments you forgot, the reasons behind your choices, the pieces of you that live just beneath your awareness. What if you've never truly made a free decision? What if every preference, every belief, every value you hold was given to you? Not chosen, but absorbed, shaped by moments you didn't recognize at the time. And now when you think you are deciding, you're only playing out a script you didn't write. Would that knowledge destroy your sense of self? Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe the room doesn't show you anything new. Maybe it just removes what protects you from seeing what's already there. It takes away denial, takes away distraction, leaves you face to face with reality, uninterrupted. The truth of your relationships, the truth of your desires, the truth of your insignificance. You might discover that the people you love don't really know you, that the future you're working toward isn't what you want, that the things you fear most are already happening quietly, just outside your awareness. And maybe worst of all, you realize that you always knew, that you spent your life pretending not to. That the ignorance wasn't innocent, it was chosen. They say the mind can only hold so much contradiction before it breaks. Maybe that's what happens in the room. You don't see something terrible, you see something undeniable, and your mind, desperate to protect you, begins to collapse under the weight of it. And now you wonder if it's all true. Wouldn't it be better to know, even if it costs you your peace? Even if it leaves you changed forever. But then the deeper question comes. What if you go in and nothing happens? What if you're already beyond the threshold? What if the illusions are already gone? And this is the truth, that your mind has seen everything, and you've simply forgotten the moment it happened. And what you call sanity is just the quiet, practiced skill of looking away. You reach for the handle, and you realize you already know what's on the other side. You believe you just made a choice, that you considered your options, weighed them carefully, and selected one path over another. But what if you didn't? What if the decision was already made before you were even aware of having a choice? There's a moment, just a few seconds before you feel like you've decided, when your brain has already begun the process. Neurons have fired, patterns have formed, the outcome is unfolding silently, invisibly, without your knowledge. And when the awareness finally arrives, when the decision feels conscious, it's already too late. You've simply caught up to what your brain already decided, that sense of freedom, of agency. It's not what you think it is. You reach for a cup. You choose a word. You turn left instead of right. But behind each of these movements, there's activity, electrical, biological, unconscious, already underway. The impulse to act begins before the thought to act arises. And yet, you feel like you were the one who decided. The feeling is real, but it may not be true. Consider how this unfolds. You're asked to pick between two options, left or right, red or blue. You pause, reflect, then choose. It feels deliberate, but if we scanned your brain, we'd see activity predicting your choice seconds before you become aware of it. The machinery of your mind moves first. Awareness follows. So the question is, where exactly is the self? You think of yourself as the author of your actions, the one steering, choosing, navigating. But the more we study the mind, the more it looks like you are the witness, not the cause. You're sitting inside a system that generates behavior and then explains it to itself afterward. The story of why comes later, sometimes instantly, sometimes seconds too late. Even now, as you listen to this, you may feel disturbed, resistant. You want to believe your choices are yours. You want to believe in agency, in willpower, in self-control. But ask yourself honestly, how often do you truly understand your own reasons? How often do you act on instinct, habit, reflex, and only later decide what it meant? You see someone and dislike them instantly. You rationalize it later. You make a decision and call it gut instinct, but you can't trace the logic. You react emotionally, then construct a justification after the fact. The story of yourself, your choices, your values, it's assembled in hindsight. You discover what's already been decided. And if that's true, if consciousness isn't the cause, but the consequence, then what does that mean for your sense of responsibility? If your brain makes the decision and you simply become aware of it, is that still a choice? Are you still accountable? Maybe, maybe not. But the line between guilt and innocence becomes harder to draw. You're still the one who acted, still the one who spoke. But if the choice wasn't truly free, if it was the result of unconscious processes you didn't control, then what part of it belongs to you? You feel fear creeping in, not because this strips you of morality, but because it strips you of identity. You've always assumed there was a you doing the choosing, that choices came from within, from who you are. But if they come from something deeper, something you can't see, can't access, then who are you really? A machine running code it didn't write. There's a temptation to fight this thought, to cling harder to the idea of agency. You want to believe there's still a layer of freedom somewhere, some final checkpoint where your will overrides your biology. But the evidence keeps pulling you backward. The closer you look, the more that final checkpoint fades. And something else happens too. You begin to notice how often your sense of control was never real. How often you blamed yourself for choices you never truly made. How often you assumed guilt for behaviors that were more reflex than decision. The shame starts to look misplaced, but so does the pride. You didn't choose your desires. You didn't choose your fears. You didn't choose your tendencies toward compassion or cruelty or addiction or love. You experienced them. You noticed them, but you didn't create them. And still, you feel like you did. That feeling of ownership, of direction, is the final illusion. It's the story your brain tells itself, moment by moment, to create the sensation of self. Without it, the mind would fracture. So the illusion remains, smooth, convincing, comforting. But deep down beneath that story, something else is happening. Decisions are forming in silence. Outcomes are already in motion. You become aware of them after the fact. You react, then explain. You act, then justify. You believe you chose, but the choice was already made. And now you're left wondering, how many of your choices were never yours at all? Would you still love them if they never did what you wanted? If they spoke in ways that embarrassed you, chose things you didn't agree with, believed something you found absurd, would you still love them? Or would something begin to close inside you? It wouldn't happen all at once. just a tightening, a coolness. You'd feel it in small ways. You'd stop texting back so quickly. You'd smile less when they spoke. You'd forget their birthday, not intentionally, just conveniently. You'd still say you love them. You might even believe it, but part of you would be waiting for them to come back to who they used to be, for them to act right again, for them to remember their place in the version of life that made sense to you. Maybe you think this doesn't apply to you, that your love is pure, that it isn't built on expectations or boundaries or unspoken rules, but think carefully. Every person you've loved deeply, did you not feel safest when they were predictable? You say you love who they are, but do you mean who they are, or who they are when they don't challenge you? What happens when they change? Not in a way you chose, not in a way that makes them more pleasing, more gentle, more agreeable, but in a way that creates distance, in a way that forces you to adjust. Do you still feel that warmth then? Or does love begin to feel like work, like something slipping through your hands? And then, what do you do? Do you talk about it? Or do you manipulate gently, silently, through pressure that never names itself? You withhold praise. You avoid eye contact. You raise an eyebrow at the wrong moment. You don't lie, but you don't affirm either. You let them know, without saying it, that something is wrong, that something needs to be fixed, that they are drifting. This is how control enters, not as violence, not as dominance, but as subtle corrections, tiny punishments, shifts in tone, conditional silence. And if they respond, if they change, shrink, soften, you feel better again. You say love has returned. But did it return? Or did control return? What does it mean if the version of them you love most is the one that bends? It's hard to see, because it never feels cruel. It feels like concern, like care, like wanting what's best for them. But ask yourself, best for them, or best for you? Would you still love them if their truth hurt your feelings? If their growth made you feel small? If their independence made you unnecessary? Could you love someone fully while being completely powerless over them? Or is your love always partly a negotiation, an unspoken deal where your affection buys influence? Because maybe you don't love who they are. Maybe you love who they become around you. You love the version of them that responds to your moods, your needs, your rhythms. And when they stop, when they become whole in ways you didn't choose, you feel abandoned, betrayed. Not because they left, but because they stopped orbiting you. So you try to pull them back, not with force, not with threat, but with disappointment, with withdrawal, with the quiet implication that they are hurting you. Even when they're simply existing as themselves, it doesn't feel like control. It feels like love navigating difficulty. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's the inability to love what you cannot shape. Because real love, uncontrolled, unmanipulated, unedited, asks for something terrifying. It asks you to let go, to let them change, to let them be strange, irrational, different. It asks you to watch them walk away from who they were, even if that version was easier for you to love. And most people can't do that. They don't stop loving outright. They just recalibrate. They shift their warmth, their presence, their attention. They turn love into a reward, a reaction, a consequence. They don't say, "Be who I want," but they say it with their absence. And so the other person bends, not because they're weak, but because they're tired, because they want the love back, because they miss being seen. And slowly, silently, they become small again, not to be loved, but to be allowed. And maybe that's the most disturbing truth of all. You don't always love people for who they are. You love them when they are easiest to control. What if the memory you lost last night wasn't lost at all? What if, Somewhere, someone else is dreaming it. You forget things constantly. Not just names or appointments, but entire moments. The way your mother's voice sounded when she said something kind, the exact feeling of holding someone's hand for the first time. You don't notice the forgetting as it happens. It slips away without warning, like air leaving a room. 1 second it's there, the next it's gone, and you don't ask where it went. But imagine it didn't vanish. Imagine every forgotten moment was absorbed quietly, invisibly, into someone else's unconscious. A transfer, unintentional, untraceable. While you sleep, while you blink, while your attention shifts, your discarded memories fall into the dreams of strangers. But your dreams feel disconnected, broken, made of things you don't recognize, places you've never been, faces you've never seen. You assume they're invented. But what if they're not? What if they're pieces of someone else's life? Shards of forgotten afternoons, lost conversations, buried sensations that were never yours to begin with. And what if it goes both ways? You forget something small, a joke told to you years ago, a moment of shame so minor you barely registered it. But tonight, someone miles away dreams it exactly. The words, the tone, even the awkward laugh. They wake unsettled, unsure why they feel embarrassed. They have no idea it isn't theirs. And maybe one night you dream of a woman crying on a train. You don't know her. You've never seen that station before. But the pain feels real, personal. It sits with you all day. What if it was never yours? What if it was a memory someone else couldn't bear to keep? You start to wonder how much of you is truly yours. How many of your instincts, reactions, or fears were born in your own life, and how many were borrowed without your consent? You begin to trace your thoughts backward, but the path is broken. There are gaps where logic should be, spaces where something once was. You try to remember what you've forgotten, but you can't. That's the nature of forgetting. It leaves no residue, no evidence, only absence. And the more you try to focus on that absence, the larger it grows until you're not sure if there was ever something there at all. But someone else remembers it now, not clearly, not consciously. They don't know it belongs to you. They don't even know it's real. But they feel it in their sleep, like a weight. They walk through your memory, mistaking it for their own imagination. And if this has always been happening, if minds have always leaked into each other through forgetting and dreaming, then nothing you've ever known was fully yours. Every belief, every impression, every fear or desire might be traced back to someone else's discarded thought, and you'll never know where the line is. This isn't reincarnation. It isn't fate. It's something colder, more mechanical. A hidden system of redistribution. Your mental trash becomes someone else's emotional core. Your pain, once erased, becomes the foundation of another person's longing, and you can never take it back. So what happens when you forget something important, something foundational, a moment that shaped you? If it leaves your mind forever, does the part of you it built go with it, or does it live on, quietly, inside someone else? Maybe that's why you sometimes feel like a stranger to yourself. Not because you've changed, but because you've been edited. Parts of you exported, others inserted. Slowly, silently, while you weren't looking. And if you are the sum of your memories, then what are you when those memories aren't yours? What are you when they never were? What if your entire life is a second-hand collage made from the forgettings of others, stitched together in the dark? You might be dreaming someone else's childhood. You might be terrified of a danger that never threatened you. You might be grieving something that never happened. And when you forget again tomorrow, someone else will pick up the pieces. They won't know why they wake up crying, or why they dream of your face, but they will, and you'll never remember why. What if you could cure the disease? But the cure makes you a killer. You stand beside a hospital bed, watching someone gasp for air, body shaking with the strain of something invisible but relentless. You have the answer. It's not a drug, not a surgery. It's something else, something that works instantly, flawlessly. But there's a condition. For each life you save, another must be taken. Someone, somewhere, will die. You won't know them. You won't see it happen. But it will happen, directly because of you. At first the idea feels ridiculous. You'd never accept it. The cost is too high. But the suffering in front of you is real. You know the disease. You know how it ends. Slow deterioration. Painful, humiliating decline. A life squeezed down to hospital rooms and desperate breaths. And you can stop it. Instantly. You just have to accept what that means. You think of fairness, of justice. But the disease isn't fair. It strikes without reason, without mercy. The people it touches did nothing to deserve it. And the ones who would die in exchange, they wouldn't deserve it either. That's the weight of it. No easy trade, no moral calculation that balances. Just one life for another. Random. Indiscriminate. You wonder if not acting is better, if letting the disease run its course is somehow more moral. But is it? When you could stop it? When the cure is in your hands? Is refusing to act really neutrality, or is it a quieter kind of killing? Maybe you start small, one person, someone you love. The decision doesn't feel abstract anymore. You watch their body fail, and you can't bear it. So you choose. You administer the cure. Somewhere, another body drops. You don't see it. There's no news report, no obituary that reaches you. Just the quiet knowledge that you made a decision. You saved one life. You ended another. It haunts you, but not enough to stop. Because the cure works. Perfectly. Word spreads. More come to you, pleading, sobbing, begging for relief. And the question repeats. Again and again. Each time you say yes, it becomes easier. You stop imagining the victims. They blur into a distant number. Your patients are real. They thank you. They hug you. They tell you that you gave them back their lives, and maybe you believe it. Maybe you start to feel like a hero. The death becomes a background cost. You stop asking who dies. You stop pretending to care until one day, someone does ask. Not one of your patients, but someone else. Someone who lost a loved one, suddenly, inexplicably, and they trace it back to you. They ask how you decided it was worth it. They ask why their mother, their brother, their child was chosen to die so a stranger could live. And you have no answer, because you never chose. You just accepted the cost. That's when the guilt returns. Sharper now. You start to see the faces again. Not the ones you saved, the ones you condemned. Not through neglect, but through action. Through your hands. But what would you do now? Stop, let the disease return. Spread, kill indiscriminately again. Would that really make you cleaner, or just allow you to retreat into denial? You start to wonder if maybe this is just how the world works. Quiet exchanges, one pain traded for another, one death to buy one life. And we just pretend it isn't happening when we don't see the price. But what if it gets worse? What if the disease evolves? What if it spreads faster, becomes more lethal? Now it's not one for one. Now the cure takes 2 lives for each it saves. And still they come, the dying, the desperate, still begging, still hoping, still trusting you. Do you continue? Do you change your answer? How many deaths does a single life justify? Is there a number? a threshold, or is that just another illusion we create to feel less monstrous? You try to draw the line, you try to say, no more, but now the silence feels heavier. Now, when someone dies from the disease, it isn't fate, it's you, your refusal. Your morality becomes its own executioner. The guilt doesn't fade, it just shifts. And maybe this is the realization that finally breaks you, that every choice, every path leads to death. Whether you act or don't, whether you choose the cure or reject it. The only thing that changes is who dies and how much of that death you're willing to see. You wanted to believe you were saving people, but now it all feels like rearranging the suffering, moving pain from one life to another, and you can't remember anymore which choice is the cure and which is the disease. What if the person you despise most saves your life? Not out of obligation, not as part of a deal, just a moment where you're dying, helpless, and they choose to intervene, pull you from the wreckage, call for help, press down on a wound until the bleeding stops. You live because they acted. The moment ends, but something doesn't reset. You carry it now, that knowledge, that contradiction. You're alive because of them. So what happens next? Hating someone is simple when they're distant, when the story is clean, when you're the one who was hurt, and they're the one who did the hurting. There's comfort in that clarity, a stable moral framework. You tell yourself they're evil, selfish, cruel, and that hatred begins to define you. But now you owe them your life. You can try to ignore it, dismiss it. Tell yourself it doesn't erase what they've done, and it doesn't. Saving someone doesn't undo cruelty. It doesn't reverse betrayal, but it does introduce confusion. Every time you feel that hatred rise again, something interrupts it. A detail you can't forget. The sound of their voice when they said you'd be okay. The way their hands didn't shake. The way they didn't hesitate. And now, when you tell the story, your story, you have to include them. Not as the villain, but as the reason you're still breathing. That ruins everything, doesn't it? It gets harder to hate someone when they've saved you. But not because they've changed, because your story no longer fits. So what do? Some people double down, twist the act into something ugly. Say it was manipulation, an accident, that they only saved you to control you, or to feel superior, or to make themselves look good. You rewrite the moment so you can keep your hatred pure, uncontaminated. But deep down you know the truth. You remember the moment, you know it wasn't calculated. And now the question is no longer about them, it's about you. What does it mean to keep hating someone who saved you? Does it make you principled or ungrateful? Are you loyal to your values, or just bitter? Is your hatred built on truth or habit? This is the paradox. You were the victim. You were wronged. You were hurt. But now you're also alive because of them. How do you hold both at once? You try to compartmentalize. Tell yourself you can acknowledge what they did without forgiving them. You don't have to feel grateful. You don't have to soften. You can just take the life they gave you and walk away unchanged. But that's not how memory works, not how emotions work. You don't get to isolate one act from the rest. It bleeds in. Every interaction you remember, every argument, every betrayal, all of it now exists beside this one undeniable fact. They saved you. Maybe they still hate you. Maybe they still don't care, but that doesn't change what happened. And if you're honest, it changes you. You start to wonder what else you've misjudged. What other truths are more complicated than they seemed? Where else your certainty might be hollow? You start to notice how fragile your hatred really was. How much it depended on control, on consistency. on believing that people don't change, that moments don't matter, that stories stay fixed. But now, everything's shifting. You want to return to the clarity you had before. But it's gone, and something else begins to grow in its place. Not forgiveness, not connection, just a deep, quiet discomfort. Because now, every time you feel anger, it's joined by a memory that doesn't belong. A memory you didn't choose, one that doesn't fit. And you can't get rid of it. You start to ask questions you don't want to answer. Would you have done the same for them? Would you have hesitated? Would you have watched them die? And if the answer is yes, then what does that say about you? You can try to go back, to feel what you used to feel. But hatred requires certainty. And now all you have is complexity. That's what they gave you. Not redemption, not peace, just complexity. And that's something you'll carry forever. Because it's easy to hate someone who hurt you. It's much harder to hate someone who saved you. What if your sanity isn't proof that you're healthy, but proof that you're deluded? People say that the insane don't know they're insane, that the very nature of madness is blindness to itself. So you comfort yourself by contrast. You tell yourself that because you question, because you doubt, because you reflect, you must be sane. That's how you know. That's the evidence. Your self-awareness becomes your reassurance. But what if that's exactly how the delusion protects itself? What if the system that maintains your sanity is built to absorb doubt, to make questioning feel like proof instead of warning? You feel discomfort, you examine it, and then you let it go. You keep living. You assume that the presence of anxiety, confusion, contradiction, all those things mean you're still thinking clearly. But what if they mean the opposite? Imagine a person trapped in a delusion so complete that even their questioning is part of it. Every time they start to suspect something is wrong, their mind supplies an answer, a distraction, a rationalization, and because they're still asking questions, they believe they're free, they believe they're in control, they believe they are sane. That could be you. You wake up, you go about your life. You wonder sometimes whether something is off, whether you're making the right choices, whether the things you believe are really true. But you always come back to that same quiet certainty, that the fact you're capable of these thoughts is enough. But why would that be true? Delusion isn't always violent or chaotic. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in routine, in familiarity, in the comfort of small doubts that never quite bloom into real confrontation. You don't need to believe something extreme to be lost. You just need to never ask the right question long enough for the answer to matter. And if you did, if you finally ask that question, fully, seriously, without flinching, what would happen? Maybe you've built your life around certain assumptions, ideas about who you are, what the world is, what matters. Maybe those ideas are flawed, but you've lived in them for so long that they feel like home. They feel like you. So you keep turning back again and again, not because they're right, but because you're afraid of what replacing them would mean. And maybe that's what separates sanity from madness, not truth, but comfort. The ability to maintain a consistent illusion, the willingness to let small doubts soothe you instead of unravel you. Maybe sanity isn't health. Maybe it's just the name you give to whatever thoughts let you keep going. Because the people who break, the ones who spiral, the ones who lose themselves, they often do so by following those questions too far. They lose the illusion. They see something that can't be unseen. They reach the edge of the framework and fall through. And the world calls them insane, not because they're wrong, but because they've stopped playing along. So if you're still here, still functioning, still adapting, still coping, what does that prove? Maybe it proves that your delusion is stronger, that your framework is more resilient, that the illusions holding you together are stickier, more efficient, harder to tear apart. Maybe your sanity isn't clarity, it's just a better disguise. And when you reassure yourself, when you say, I must be sane because I ask these questions, maybe you're doing the very thing the delusion trained you to do. Maybe that's the trap. A mind clever enough to doubt itself, but not brave enough to believe the doubt. A system designed to contain its own cracks. You don't need to be sure of anything, really. You just need to be sure that your uncertainty is a sign of health. That's how it stays stable. That's how it protects itself. You ask just enough questions to feel safe, but never the one question that would make you stop and dismantle the whole thing. So the cycle continues. You question, you feel reassured, you continue. And every step deeper into the illusion makes you feel more certain you're not in one. And that's the thought you can't hold for too long. That the most reliable sign of being lost is thinking you've found your way. What if every time you saved a life, your own grew shorter? Not metaphorically, literally. Each act of rescue, each moment you prevent someone else's death, shaves days, weeks, maybe years off your own lifespan. You feel it too. Subtle at first, a little more tired, a little more strained. But with each life you preserve, your body gives something up, something it can't get back. Would you still do it? Maybe at first. Yes, without hesitation. The cost seems noble, poetic, even trading pieces of your own existence to preserve others. You tell yourself it's the right thing, that you'd rather live a shorter life filled with meaning than a long one spent watching others suffer. And maybe that's true, but then you begin to notice the trade-offs. The child you pulled from a burning car, 3 days gone. The stranger you revived with CPR, 10 more, and it starts adding up. You try not to think about it. You focus on the outcome. They're alive. You gave them something they never would have had. But when you're alone, when the noise fades, a quiet fear begins to whisper. How much of you is left? You don't know how long your life would have been. No one does. But you feel it. This creeping acceleration toward the end. You see new lines in your face. You feel older than you should. You ache in places that once felt strong. Every breath feels just a little more precious than the last. Still, you keep going. Because to stop would be worse. To stand by and do nothing. To let someone die just to preserve yourself. You can't stomach it. Even thinking about it makes your chest tighten. So you keep giving pieces of yourself away. Quietly, relentlessly, until one day you hesitate. Not for long, just a moment. But it's there, a scream, a car crash, a drowning, and you freeze, not out of fear, but calculation. You think about your body, your time. You wonder, just briefly, how many more you can afford. And that single hesitation stays with you. Afterward, you tell yourself, it didn't matter. You helped, you acted, but it wasn't clean anymore. It wasn't automatic. The cost has become part of the decision. And now something's shifted. You begin to wonder, is this still altruism, or is it something else? Maybe it's addiction, maybe it's guilt. Maybe you've tied your sense of worth to how much of yourself you can lose. Saving people isn't just about them anymore. It's about proving you're still good, still useful, still worth the days you're spending. And then someone asks for help, and you don't move. You're tired. Not just physically, but deeper than that. You've started counting. Not lives saved, but time lost. You start seeing each act of kindness as a transaction. A trade you're no longer sure you can keep making. And worse, you start choosing. This one looks young. That one looks kind. That one reminds you of someone you love. And this one you let go, quietly, just this once, just to see how it feels. You don't tell anyone. No one would understand. They'd see a hero. You know better. And now every person who crosses your path becomes a question. Is their life worth part of yours? Are they good enough? Innocent enough? Important enough? You never meant to think like this, but you do. And still, they keep coming. The world never stops needing saving, and you're the one they call. You can't explain why you look older than you should, why you sometimes stare too long before stepping in. They just see the results. They just say thank you. But you know what each of them cost and what it's doing to you. Eventually, you stop going outside as much. You avoid crowds. You ignore cries for help. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you care too much. You know what it means now. You know what it takes. And then one day you see someone drowning, and you don't move. Not out of cruelty, not out of fear, but because you're empty. Not physically, but in a way that feels deeper, like there's nothing left to give. Like the part of you that could trade time for life has burned out completely, and in that silence, as the water swallows another life you could have saved, you feel something worse than guilt, relief. And now you live with that. Not just the memory of the lives you saved, but the quiet weight of the ones you didn't. Not because you couldn't, but because you wouldn't. And that's the final cost. Not time, not age, but the slow, irreversible erosion of who you thought you were. What if you're not actually afraid of dying? What if that's not it at all? Maybe what you're really afraid of is what dying looks like from the outside. Not the moment your body shuts down, but the long, quiet slide toward it. The weakness, the dependence, the slow unraveling of everything that once made you feel strong. Maybe that's the part you can't bear. You tell yourself you fear death, but you still take risks. You still drive too fast. You still ignore the lump, the ache, the feeling that something isn't quite right. You live in denial, not fear, because fear would mean caution, avoidance. And yet, here you are, playing with danger, pretending you're just fine. So maybe death isn't the real problem. Maybe what terrifies you is being seen as someone who's afraid, someone who breaks down, cracks, fails, someone who needs help and can't pretend anymore. You imagine the hospital bed, the fragile skin, the tube in your throat, not just the pain, but the eyes watching you endure it, pitying you. You imagine becoming a burden, and that shame hits harder than the thought of dying itself. You picture people visiting, standing over you, speaking softly, carefully, like you're already half gone. And you hate that more than anything. You hate the way their voices change. You hate the kindness in their eyes, because it means they've already decided you're no longer strong. And what if that's the truth? What if your entire life has been an armor against that moment? Every accomplishment, every display of control, every refusal to admit pain, not because you wanted to live forever, but because you wanted to be untouchable until the end. But death isn't quick for most people. It doesn't arrive in silence or dignity. It drags itself in, slowly, taking pieces of you as it goes. And as you lose them, your memory, your independence, your body's control, you're not afraid because they're signs of death. You're afraid because they make you look weak. And looking weak is what you've built your entire identity to avoid. You think of strength as survival, but really it's been your disguise, the thing that kept others at arm's length, the thing that made them say you're handling it well, the thing that kept you from ever having to admit you were scared. But if you can't let yourself be seen as weak, then what happens when weakness is no longer a choice? When it arrives without asking, and everyone sees? Do you resist it? Hide it? Pretend even then that you're fine? And if you do, What does that make the final part of your life? An act, a performance to preserve an image that no longer matches reality. That thought creeps in. If the last thing people see of you is someone struggling, someone breaking down, someone vulnerable, does it erase everything you were before? You've always feared that the end defines the story, that no one will remember your strength if they have to help you into a wheelchair, that your value is conditional, contingent on being the one who never needs saving. But what if that's not true? What if the real strength was never in appearing invincible, but in the quiet acceptance of being human? That's harder, isn't it? It's easier to die suddenly, unexpectedly. Easier to imagine going out while still intact, untouched by decay. Easier to picture being remembered as you were, sharp, capable, in control, than to imagine being watched as you fade. But most people don't get that. Most people go slowly, and everyone around them watches. And so the fear grows, not of pain, not of the unknown, but of being seen, day by day, losing what made you feel like you. You might not even notice when it starts. The moment you need help with the stairs. The time you forget a name and laugh it off. The quiet adjustments, the little compensations, until one day someone else notices, and you can't deny it anymore. And then you're exposed, not just to death, but to being pitied, managed, handled gently. That's the moment you dread. That's the one that haunts you, because it reveals what you've always feared most. That your worth was never unconditional. That your value disappears with your strength. That when you're no longer able to carry others, no one knows how to carry you. And maybe that's why death feels terrifying. Not because it ends everything, but because of what it forces you to become before it does. Seen, fragile, dependent, small. Maybe dying isn't the scariest part. Maybe it's finally being seen as you are. You get a sharp pain in your stomach, and for a second, you think you're dying, but then it fades. Slowly, carefully, your body relaxes. Nothing's wrong, no injury, no illness, just a brief flicker of pain, unconnected to anything. So why did it happen? Your mind will offer a dozen explanations. Stress, tension, a digestive issue, a nerve misfire. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, because the truth is harder to grasp. Your mind did it on purpose, not because something's wrong, but because it needed to remind you that you exist. Pain forces presence. It snaps you into the now. Nothing brings awareness like discomfort. When your body hurts, even for a second, you stop thinking about the future, the past, or who you're supposed to be. You return completely to yourself. So what happens when life becomes too numb, too empty, too quiet? Sometimes the mind intervenes. It manufactures sensations, subtle, sharp, persistent, not always severe, just enough to pull your attention back, enough to feel real, because if you never hurt, you start to disappear. The edges of identity blur. The boundaries between you and the world grow soft. And somewhere deep inside, your brain starts to panic. It wants certainty, structure, proof that you're still here. And pain is the most reliable proof it knows. You wouldn't choose this consciously, but somewhere deep in your wiring, discomfort becomes a kind of anchor. Even anxiety, racing thoughts, clenched chest, shallow breath is a form of pain. It's also a form of control, because as long as you're suffering, you're not empty. As long as something hurts, something matters. That's why some people can't sit still in silence. Why peace feels unbearable. Why happiness, when it finally arrives, triggers dread instead of relief. Because your nervous system doesn't trust calm. It doesn't believe in ease. Somewhere it learned that reality equals danger, that safety is a lie, that joy is a trap. And so, even in quiet moments, the alarm keeps sounding, not because you're broken, but because your mind believes pain is safer than nothing. It's trying to protect you. That's the cruelest part. It creates symptoms, discomfort, intrusive thoughts, because it thinks they'll keep you alive. Pain sharpens awareness. Stress increases vigilance. Even emotional suffering can serve a function. It draws attention to threats, to losses, to things you care about. But eventually, you start to wonder how much of what I feel is real, and how much was created, just so I wouldn't forget. I exist. The line becomes hard to find. You pull away from a burning stove. That's survival. But you feel your stomach twist when you think of an old memory. That's not physical. That's your mind generating something internal, something abstract, and turning it into sensation. It doesn't even have to be specific. Sometimes just the feeling of dread is enough. A shapeless sense of wrongness, hovering in the background. No clear cause, no obvious danger. Just a hum of discomfort to keep you anchored, to keep you from drifting too far into nothing. And then you realize something even more unsettling. When the pain goes away, you feel less real. Like something important is missing. Like you've lost the thread, because you've come to associate intensity with meaning, agitation with presence. The moments when you're most distressed are also the moments when you feel most certain of who you are. The pain, as much as you hate it, gives you structure, and without it, you start to dissolve. You try to find substitutes, stimulation, conflict, distraction, something sharp enough to recreate the feeling of being alive. But they don't last. They never last. Because none of them come from inside you the way pain does. They're too external, too easy to ignore. So the mind returns to what it knows. It turns up the volume again. It pulls old memories out of storage. It whispers fears in the quiet moments. It tightens your chest, twists your stomach, clouds your head, and you respond without meaning to. You tighten, brace, react. Because part of you still believes it's real, still believes something's wrong, even when there's no threat. Even when everything is calm, you still feel it. And that's the paradox. Your mind creates pain to protect you, but the pain itself becomes the threat. You're trapped in a feedback loop, where the thing meant to help you feel alive also keeps you from ever feeling safe. You start to wonder what you'd be without it. Without the tension, the background noise, the constant unease. Would you even recognize yourself? Would you feel anything at all? Or would you disappear completely? Maybe that's what your mind is truly afraid of. Not danger, not death, but silence. Because silence means there's nothing left to respond to, no signal to interpret, no enemy to fight. And if there's no pain, who are you, really? Maybe that's the most disturbing thought of all, that the pain isn't a sign something's wrong. Maybe it's just a reminder that you're still here. What happens when the truth becomes illegal, not suppressed, not hidden? Illegal, where the only statements you're allowed to say must be false, where telling the truth isn't just discouraged, it's punishable, not by social shaming, not by censorship, but by law. Speaking a fact is a crime. A confession gets you arrested. An accurate description of reality could get you exiled. And yet, lying, open, intentional deception is not just permitted. It's the standard. It's the law. It's the only acceptable form of communication. At first, it feels impossible. Your mind tries to push back. Surely a society like that couldn't function. But think carefully. You've lied before, so has everyone else. Lies smooth things over. Lies protect relationships. Lies preserve stability. What if, in this society, that idea is taken to its logical extreme? What if people came to believe that truth is what destroys and lying is what holds the world together? You begin to see how this could work. Schools teach children to lie, not just as a skill, but as a virtue. Honesty isn't a value, it's a threat. A child who blurts out a fact is corrected sharply. A test asks them for false answers. What color is the sky? They answer, it's green, and the teacher smiles. Good, she says, that's correct. Laws follow suit. Courtrooms punish witnesses who speak truthfully. Journalists are fined for publishing facts. Surveillance isn't used to catch deception, it's used to catch honesty. And everyone learns to adapt, not through fear, but habit, through culture, through a shared understanding that truth, if allowed, would unravel everything. You think about how people would interact. Every compliment, every apology, every vow, knowingly false, and yet not meaningless. These lies become their own kind of meaning, their own system. A shared performance where everyone understands the rules, where the words themselves are false. But the act of lying becomes the real communication. A husband tells his wife, I never think of anyone but you. A politician says, we've made progress. A doctor says, you're going to be fine. Everyone knows it isn't true. And yet, it works. It maintains peace. It keeps society from collapse. And then you wonder, what if someone tells the truth? Not a mistake, not a whisper, a deliberate, public truth. The water is poisoned. The election was rigged. This medication doesn't work. These statements aren't just dangerous, they're illegal, because truth disrupts the shared illusion. It creates panic, breaks trust, makes people question what they're supposed to believe. So the truth teller is punished, not as a rebel, but as a threat to public safety. You want to believe this society is evil, broken, wrong. But then something shifts. You remember times in your own life when telling the truth made things worse, when honesty caused harm, when a well-placed lie prevented chaos. You start to wonder, is lying always deception? Or can it become something else, ritual, structure, survival? What happens when lies stop being distortions and become the framework itself? When they're not a veil over truth, but the thing that replaces it? If everyone lies and everyone knows it, isn't that a kind of honesty? A system built not on what's real, but on what's necessary. And then, deeper still, a more unsettling thought emerges. Would you survive in this world? Could you lie about everything? What you see, what you feel, what you remember? Could you tell your child their pain isn't real? Could you comfort your friend with a lie, knowing it's required? Could you stand in front of someone you love and say the exact opposite of what you feel, because that's what's legal, expected, moral? And if you refused, if you told the truth, you wouldn't just be arrested, you'd be hated, feared, seen not as courageous, but unstable. A danger, because truth, in this world, doesn't enlighten. It doesn't set people free, it only burns, it only destroys. You start to realize the society isn't insane, it's coherent, terrifyingly coherent. Its rules make sense if you accept the premise that truth is too dangerous, that lying is what keeps people from despair, that reality, when spoken aloud, is more destructive than comforting. And now you wonder, how far is this from your own world? How often do you lie to protect someone? How often do you smile when you're in pain? How often do you hear the truth and pretend you didn't? Maybe the shift is smaller than you thought. Maybe the only difference is that in your world, lies are informal. In theirs, they're enforced. Because here's the last thought, the one that stays. If everyone lies, and everyone knows they're lying, but no one is allowed to say so, how long before the difference between lie and truth disappears completely? How long before no one remembers what honesty even feels like? How long before the lie becomes real? What if the only way to be forgiven was to confess to something you didn't do? Not a misunderstanding, not a grey area, a lie, one you know is false, one everyone else knows is false too. But for reasons no one will explain, they need you to say it out loud. Yes, I did it. Only then will they stop. Only then will they let go. Only then will they say the words you desperately want to hear. You're forgiven. At first you refuse. Of course you do. It's dishonest. It's wrong. It violates something deep in you. Some principle you barely understand, but feel in your bones. You keep insisting on the truth. You repeat your innocence calmly, then frantically, then hopelessly. But it doesn't matter. Their eyes stay cold. Their voices stay silent. And the punishment continues. You try reasoning with them. You ask for fairness, for evidence, for logic. They offer none. Just the same quiet condition. Admit the lie and we'll forgive you. Nothing else works. Nothing else even moves them. As if the truth isn't just irrelevant, but offensive. You begin to wonder, is this really about justice, or is it about control, about power? You're not being asked to confess because they believe you're guilty. You're being asked to confess because they need you to surrender. And nothing proves surrender like agreeing to a lie. But then something shifts. Slowly, quietly. You start to feel yourself unraveling. The silence eats away at you. The isolation grows heavier. The weight of being believed guilty, even when you're not, starts to deform something inside you. You feel your sense of self thinning, fraying at the edges. You start to wonder, what's worse, the punishment or the loneliness of being the only one who remembers the truth? And so you consider it. Just saying the words, just once, just to make it stop. You wouldn't mean it, of course. It would be strategic, tactical, a performance, not a betrayal. You could still keep the truth alive inside you, quietly, secretly, as long as you don't forget. But something about that thought disturbs you, not because it feels wrong, but because it feels so easy. You wonder what that means about you, about how much your principles really matter, about how much you'd sacrifice just to feel understood again. And you start to see the trap. It's not just that the lie is false, it's that the lie redefines who you are. The moment you say it, something irreversible happens. The line between truth and survival disappears, and once it's gone, how do you ever find it again? Yet the pressure keeps building. Days pass, maybe months. The world around you grows quieter. The resistance starts to feel childish, prideful. You begin to hear your own voice differently, less righteous, more desperate. You start to wonder if maybe you're being difficult. Maybe this is your fault. Maybe you're just stubborn, paranoid, broken. And that's when it happens. Not in a dramatic moment, but in some ordinary silence, you hear yourself whisper it. Okay, I did it. The words don't feel real. They hang in the air, thin and artificial, but they work. The punishment stops, the coldness lifts, and the forgiveness comes instantly, almost eagerly. You're surrounded again, held, praised for your honesty, told you're brave for finally admitting the truth. And part of you wants to scream, but no one would listen. Because now, you're no longer the person who didn't do it. You're the one who confessed, and everything else disappears. You try to hold on to the memory of what really happened. You tell yourself you'll remember, but the more time passes, the harder it gets. People remind you of what you did. They build stories around it. They quote things you never said, and slowly reality bends. You find yourself doubting, hesitating, forgetting. Eventually, even your own memories betray you. You start to wonder if maybe you did do it in some way. Maybe not how they say, but maybe close enough. You look back and the details blur, the certainty fades, and the truth, whatever it once was, becomes unreachable. You were forgiven. But the price was truth, and now you're clean in the eyes of the world, but irreversibly contaminated in your own. And the most disturbing part isn't that they made you lie, it's that you agreed. What if that thought you keep pushing away is actually the real you? Not the polished version you present to others, not the one built out of habits, memories, and stories, but the version beneath all that, the one that only shows itself in brief, intrusive flashes before you crush it down and pretend it was never there. You know the thoughts I mean, the sudden urge to harm someone you love, the fantasy of betraying everything you care about. The moment you imagine a life where you're cruel, selfish, monstrous, these thoughts arrive without warning, without reason, and you treat them like accidents, like static in your mind. You tell yourself they don't mean anything, but what if they do? What if these dark intrusions aren't random? What if they're messages from the part of you that's tired of pretending? The part that's been watching quietly while you pretend to be something you're not. The part that doesn't believe your stories about being kind, decent, or good. It speaks in moments, doesn't it? When you're tired, angry, ashamed. When you let your guard down, even for a second, it whispers things you're horrified to hear. Things you would never say out loud, and your instinct is to push it away. Erase it, reassure yourself it means nothing. But if it meant nothing, why did it come from you? No one else put it there. No one planted it. It wasn't taught to you. It rose up from somewhere inside. From the same mind that tells you who you love, what you fear, and what you believe. The same mind you trust with every other decision. So why dismiss this part as foreign? Maybe because accepting it means breaking something. The image you've spent your life building. The one that says you are safe, moral, clean. The one that insists you'd never cross certain lines. That you're not like those people. But if this darkness is part of you, then those lines aren't real. They're just stories you tell yourself to sleep at night. And you already know how fragile those stories are. You've seen how easily they crack under pressure. Think about the moments when the mask slips, when you snap, when you lie, when you manipulate someone you care about just to win. And then tell yourself it wasn't really you. You were tired, stressed, provoked. But if it wasn't you, who was it? You don't get to claim only the good parts. You don't get to curate your identity like a museum exhibit. The violent impulse, the cruel thought, the quiet desire for control, those are yours too. They're not mistakes, they're not glitches, they're pieces of you, trying to be seen. And what scares you isn't just that they exist, it's that they make sense. That when the thought comes, some part of you agrees with it. Some part of you leans toward it, even just a little. And for a moment, you see who you could become. Maybe that's the real reason you deny it. Not because the thought is too foreign, but because it's too familiar. Because deep down, you recognize it. You can feel it now, can't you? That small voice beneath everything else. Not loud, not angry, just patient, waiting, watching. It doesn't need you to act on it. It just needs you to know it's there. And you do know, you've always known. Every time you tell yourself, that's not me, a smaller voice replies, but it could be. And that's what keeps you awake at night. Not guilt, not shame, just the quiet certainty that the boundary between who you are and who you fear becoming is thinner than you want to admit. Because maybe the self you're trying to silence is the only one telling the truth. Not the whole truth, not the best truth, but the one that's honest, the one that doesn't care about how you're seen, the one that just wants to be real. And maybe that's what terrifies you most. Not that these dark thoughts exist, but that they're not intrusions, they're invitations. You wake up in a cold room, unfamiliar and silent. At first, it's disorienting. Your mind clings to fragments, to the assumption that this is just another morning. But something feels wrong. There's a weight in the air, a heaviness behind your eyes. As you sit up, clarity starts to form, not from memory, but from absence. There's no context, no timeline, no history, just this moment. And then a thought enters your mind, not like a whisper, but a certainty. You've always been the villain, not that you committed some recent act, not that you made a terrible mistake. This isn't a twist or a fall from grace. It's the revelation of a role you were always playing, but never fully saw. And what follows is not horror, not guilt, not even shock. It's confusion. It's confusion. You start to question the framework you use to understand yourself. You think about your decisions, every rationalization, every self-assurance. The times you told yourself you had no choice, that the ends justified the means, that others just didn't understand your burden, your vision, your truth. Now you wonder, what if they did understand? What if they saw you clearly the entire time and simply chose silence over confrontation? What if no one stopped you because they feared you? Not feared what you might become, but feared what you already were. You begin to see your past through a different lens. Not altered, just reframed. The justifications don't change. The actions don't change. Only the light does. And in that new light, the outlines sharpen. The excuses feel thinner. What you called strategy now feels like manipulation. What you thought was protection now resembles control. You remember conversations where people looked away, hesitated, shifted nervously. You thought they were intimidated by your strength. What if they were quietly disgusted? And now the silence deepens. Because this isn't a story where redemption is just one choice away. You aren't misunderstood. You weren't forced into darkness. You simply weren't who you thought you were. You were someone else entirely. Someone whose harm was invisible, not because it was small, but because it was normalized, systematic, wrapped in charm, competence, and soft words. You think about every moment you judged others, their weakness, their failure to act, their complicity. You told yourself you were better, stronger, more honest, more willing to do what was necessary. But now you understand that all you did was push further, not toward truth or justice, but toward control, toward power. And you didn't just cross lines, you erased them, and told yourself that was clarity. It's easy to imagine villains as people who enjoy cruelty, who revel in pain. But what if the real horror is subtler? What if it's the belief that you were helping, fixing, saving, when in fact you were breaking things you didn't understand? What if you weren't hated, not because people approved of you, but because they had no power to stop you? And now, sitting in this quiet room, you ask yourself the question you never thought to ask before. If you've always been the villain, then who were the heroes? What if they were the people you silenced, ignored, dismissed? What if the very traits you look down on, empathy, hesitation, vulnerability, were the things that made them decent? There's no rewind, no confession that redeems. Because the damage wasn't just to others, it was to your identity. You built your sense of self on a foundation of being necessary, being right. And now that foundation is gone. You don't know who you are without it. All you know is that your clarity wasn't clarity at all. It was a mask. And now it's fallen. You think of one more possibility, that maybe everyone else saw it long ago and simply chose not to tell you that your villainy wasn't hidden. It was just endured. Quietly, patiently. Because confronting you would have been too dangerous, too exhausting. Because they knew you'd find a way to twist it back around. Maybe they didn't fear you. Maybe they pitied you. And now the deepest discomfort sets in, not because you were monstrous, but because you were ordinary. Your villainy wasn't grand. It was mundane. Built from small choices, over and over. From ego, from fear, from the refusal to pause. You were never meant to wake up this way. But now that you have, you'll never feel innocent again. Because the most disturbing part isn't what you did. It's how easy it was to live with it. How long you walked forward, never once looking down.